Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this meeting of Planning Committee B. May I first all remind you of some domestic arrangements. Toilets are situated outside the meeting room, opposite the stairs. Cold water is also available in the breakout area outside of this meeting room. If the fire alarm should sound, please leave the meeting room by following the fire exit signs and meet in the Ipswich Town Football Club training pitch. Do not re-enter the building until you're told it's safe to do so. Please switch off all your mobile phones or turn them to silent. I'd like to remind everyone present this meeting will be broadcast live to the internet and will be capable of repeated viewing. The whole of the meeting will be filmed except where there are confidential or exempt items. If you make a representation to the meeting, you'll be deemed by the Council to have consented to being filmed and to the possible use of those images and sound recordings for webcasting or training purposes. Is everybody happy with that? Thank you. First of all, I'm Barry Humphreys, Councillor Barry Humphreys. I'll be the chair for today. It's my first full chair, so please be gentle. I'm sure it will run really smoothly. And on my right, I have Ian Perez, who is our legal or planning lawyer. To the right, I have Philip Isbell, who's the Chief Planning Officer for Mid-Suffolk District Council. To my left, Robert Carmichael, who's the Governance Officer. John Payton G is the Area Planning Manager. And then we have the planning officers today, Daniel Cameron and Alex Scott. To your right, we have ward members, and to your left, we have the committee members who will be voting on the proposals in front of us today. Without further ado then, we'll move on to the agenda. Apologies for absences and substitutions.
Thank you, Chair. We have apologies today from Councillor Carter, Councillor Guthrie and Councillor Richardson. And we have three substitutes today of Councillor Mansell for Councillor Carter, Councillor Brewster for Councillor Guthrie and Councillor Haddingham for Councillor Richardson. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. To receive any declarations of pecuniary or non-pecuniary interest by members. Councillor Haddingham.
Thank you. Yes, non-pecuniary on item 7D, the Chestnuts Farm Eye. I note the applicant.
Thank you. Any others? Declarations of lobbying by members. Just two. Which items?
Item 7B, application DC 18-05621.
Minus 7D. Any declarations of personal site visits? Right on. And we'll just go for the confirmation of the minutes of the meeting held on the 7th of August 2019 by page 1.
If I may, Chair, just interlude there.
Yeah.
Just to point out, there has been a correction to the copy that the Chair has, that Councillor Matheson is now on there. Apologies for the incorrect attendance on there.
No problem. Page 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 and 12. Good, they're on. And to receive notifications of petitions in accordance with the Council.
Sorry, we just got to get a vote of assent on that.
Okay. All those in favour of the minutes, please.
Mr. Chairman, there were some of us not there on that occasion.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, we've got it. Yeah, thanks. Cool. Happy. Receive notification of petitions in accordance with the Council's petition scheme.
None received, Chair.
Now I'll go through the schedule of planning applications. On this, we will go in the order that's in front of you, going from 7 Alpha all the way through to 7 Delta in that order. The first one, or the first agenda point, is DC 18055514, land south of Pressyman Avenue in Bacton. Starts on page 17 of your papers. Planning Officer, please.
Thank you. Since writing the report, a further 2 letters maintaining their objections regarding the amended scheme have been received from residents who have also previously commented. So no new issues have been raised in these letters that haven't been raised previously. We have representations from 8 addresses. It's about 14 letters in total. In respect of the report, a couple of points to add. Firstly, the site is Grade 3 agricultural land, common to Suffolk. It is not the more valued Grade 1 or Grade 2. In the recommendation on page 37, 1F seeks the securing of a service site and parking for the community hall. This should say public parking, so the word public needs to be inserted there. And also this is for a 5-year period only as an option while other locations are possibly being considered. So if after that 5-year period of time it is not taken up as an option, then it will be secured as public open space, the details and timing to be agreed with the local planning authority. Also, just to add to that, the extent of area of the parking, associated access and footprint of the community centre, as shown on the indicative plan, is the area to be secured or otherwise for open space. So the recommendation just needs to be adjusted to reflect that it is public parking and a period of 5 years for securing the site for community hall and parking, and if this would be the extent of area as shown on the indicative plan or equivalent open space. But obviously the details of that will be picked up by the 106, and of course the reserve matters as both landscaping and layout are not part of the outline before you. Just also for the avoidance of doubt, I apologise, there's quite a few things before we get on with the presentation. For the avoidance of doubt, 35% affordable housing of 85 units is 29.75. So in this case, it's been chosen to round up, so therefore we have 30 affordable units. We have not rounded down. This application also returns to committee after previously being deferred for some amendments, and this includes a reduction of units. The case officer has summarised these changes on page 17 for your convenience, 17 and 18 of the report, and hopefully that's a helpful summary there. Right, so turning to the actual presentation, and I've got to press this button. Yes. So this site is adjacent to the settlement boundary, south of the main core of Bacton. This plan shows the various constraints, but within the site itself there's only a footpath along the top east corner. Can I point at it, or is this working? Oh, okay. So the footpath, not very clear on here, but is that line there, which leads over the railway line and across there. There is another footpath nearish by, which is this one that runs down this lane here. But in terms of other constraints, there are no other constraints in planning terms we need to pick up on the actual site itself. But let's come out a bit. We are in the countryside. This is a greenfield site. It is adjacent to a railway, and across the railway there is a sports club. There is an open crossing across the railway that is in existence. Closer in, we can see the railway a little bit clearer, which is this going along here, all the way. The site is essentially contained by the railway line in a sense, in terms of its east and southern boundaries, in terms of the wider landscape. To the west, we have strong landscaped fields, mature landscaping, and a field access network. So we've got quite a strong landscaped area here, and a pond in the middle of this, which is also well landscaped. This application is outline permission for up to 85 dwellings and a community building and associated works. Only access is included, so all other matters are reserved. There is an access for the housing, which is just here, being proposed from Prettyman. We also have an access for the community centre here, and between the two there's an essentially emergency access, which seems quite logical, coming from the housing out to where the community hall access will be. The actual density is 17.8 dwellings per hectare if you take the whole site, but if you just take the built-up area as indicatively shown, it will be about 25.9 dwellings per hectare. And obviously page 28 provides more details of the scheme in detail and the many benefits to be secured by planning condition. I understand members have been on site and so they've had the benefit of a site visit, but just running through, that is the end of Prettyman Avenue, that's the new access point for the main housing development. I'll just run through those there. And then we're looking at the field beyond. This is an outline, but the indicative plan does demonstrate at least one way forward for a development that would not result in significant adverse impact on the landscape, residential amenity, and would maintain the character not dissimilar to the adjacent development, with sufficient open space potential to give the new development a strong rural edge boundary that can be achieved on all sides. The Highways Authority do not object and recommend conditions. There is one access to serve the 85 dwellings, and local concern is on this basis has been considered. The standard adoption is for two accesses would be if it was a development of over 150 dwellings. But there are exceptions and far higher numbers have actually been approved. This proposal is very much below that trigger point for two access points for the residential element, but despite this, there's still an emergency access that has also been included. The future of the local bus service is unclear, that's been noted by the Parish Council. But despite this, Bacton itself continues to offer many facilities, including clubs, school, pubs, shop and service station in a reasonable and well-connected, accessible distance. This particular site is adjacent to the settlement boundary, not isolated, and subject to layout would appear to be very capable of integration to the current built form of the village over time. With appropriate conditions 106, the recommendation is one of approval. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you have any questions? Yes. Councillor Manson.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to ask the officer if Network Rail were consulted, because this site is adjacent to an unmanned pedestrian crossing of the railway, and I know that they've had a lot of plans to close those specifically on the main line, and I wondered what the Network Rail solution to the closure or the possible potential closure of that pedestrian crossing next to this development is. Thank you.
We have no response from Network Rail available for us to consider. Ultimately, we have no knowledge whether or not that crossing will close or not as planning officers. So the assumption would be that it would remain open.
Councillor Matheson.
Thank you, Chair. I had the benefit of the site visit and indeed the earlier committee hearing as a member. And what I was wondering was, have we any understanding why, when the second entrance was introduced into these amended plans, why that hasn't been used as the main entrance for the site, with perhaps the other, the cul-de-sac becoming the emergency access rather than what's happened?
Councillor Matheson, can you just be a little bit clearer on that question, please? Thank you.
When we visited the site, several councillors, including myself, said that surely this little piece of mid-Suffolk owned land would provide a better entrance to this site than the one that's proposed. And so I was interested to see that that was now in the plans, except that it was only to access the potential community centre rather than the reorienting the whole site so that that became the main entrance.
Unfortunately, I don't know. I'm not the case officer, so I don't know the ownership issues that might be involved in the two little bits of land. But of course, if Mid Suffolk has an interest as a landowner, they may, as a organisation separate from us as local planning authority, may have put forward particular constraints of how they would have allowed travel across that piece of land, and that might have only been relevant to a community centre rather than the housing itself. I don't know what private agreement or negotiations have happened outside of planning. Ultimately, though, what we have in terms of your planning application before you is an outline application with two accesses. While we have one layout on the table that demonstrates one way of working it, there is nothing to say you couldn't have a different balance of properties being served off one access or the other that could be considered at reserved matter stage. There is just two access points as part of the proposal before you, not necessarily the quantum of development served off each access.
Councillor Hadding.
Thank you. On page 26, John, our own sustainability people have recommended refusal. How much weight can we give their opinion?
The amount of weight you give that is obviously a matter of your discretion. In terms of what we're saying here is we have to consider the current local plan and its current requirements, and therefore we have not at this outline stage given it significant weight in the context of your current development plan. We have got conditions on energy efficiency, I believe. Bear with me, I'll just double check. To cover that point off, which is second page, thank you. So page 38, thank you. And on that basis, we feel we have done sufficient to respond to that consultation response.
Councillor Norris.
Thank you. On page 44, excuse me, top right, the emergency access, where it says bollards on emergency access, I'm just interested to ask, are these the type of bollards that retract in response to transponders on the emergency vehicles?
I don't know the answer to that question. Ultimately, that's a matter of detail that would be picked up as a reserved matter.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Matheson.
Slide 4, the aerial map, possibly, or one of the other maps, really. Could you show us where the village hall, the existing village hall, the shop, and the school are on the map, please? Or ask the ward member. Leave it till later.
This direction, isn't it? So school and the village, the store. Sorry, what we after? We after the probably not best to come out. So the store and service station are down this direction. I think they're at this point or slightly further. We have the school that is roughly around here at this point. Village hall, I don't know. Can I?
Thank you. Press the right button. Thank you. Yes, John, if you can move back to where you were hovering with the mouse a second ago. Yes, in that area you've got both village shop and pub. Just for the record, and the village hall, I believe, from memory, if you go north, you were indicating the school just to the north side of the road. There's a village hall in that area, a little further east of that, John. East, not west. Yeah, so in that sort of area. So does that assist?
I think some of this is going to come out with the ward member when the ward member speaks, so we'll wait till then. If it hasn't been answered, we'll come back to it, John. Are there any other questions for the officer? Councillor Warboy.
Impact of the development on NHS England, they say that there's insufficient capacity, and it also, when it comes to schooling, talks about the impact on the secondary school and as well as the primary school. But in your recommendations, you only mention the school contributions to the primary school. Is there a reason for that the NHS and the secondary school aren't mentioned as well?
In respect of those other elements, it would be a case of the community infrastructure levy would pick those up, as opposed to Section 106. That's why we've not gone into detail on that.
So this is a later...
It would be through a bid through community infrastructure levy that they would obtain funds as necessary for the secondary school and the NHS as they may wish.
Thank you.
If it helps, Councillor, on page 72, you'll see at the top of county advice to ourselves, you'll see there's a rough summary table with a split of section 106 and cell items in that, and that hopefully makes clear, well, as clear as these things can be, the difference between the two items.
Thank you. There are no further questions. I'm sure there'll be more as we go through the speakers. We'll move on to the speakers, please. And we have Richard Peaty from the Parish Council. If you'd like to come up, sir, and just take the table at the far end closest to you. Mr. Peaty, you have 3 minutes from the time you start, and I will give you a reminder towards the end if you're not finishing.
Thank you. You'll have seen our response of the 11th of July in the previous planning submission in your briefing papers. I was going to say little has changed other than a reduction in the number of dwellings. You've sprung a little surprise on us with this 5-year limitation on the amenity land or stroke reserve site for possible leisure centre, parish hall, whatever. And we've not, as a parish council, been able to discuss that. So I would reserve the right to come back after our next meeting to comment on that, if at all possible. We resolved on the 19th to object to this application, and our concern is one that's been discussed already, the vehicle access to the dwellings. As seen on your previous presentation, those photographs showed what the entrance is like now. Although parking restrictions are requested, our experience elsewhere in the village, for example outside the primary school, is that the police do not take any enforcement action, even if we request them. You dial 111, or whatever it is, 113, and you hang on for 25 minutes and don't get a response. So even if you want to try and object to an illegal park, you can't. Access on foot to local facilities is possible. However, as public transport to the area is now only 2 or 3 buses a day and may soon disappear completely, travel to work or training will be mainly by car. I think the contribution of £25,000 for 2 new bus stops may be better spelt elsewhere. If the committee resolved to support this application, we request that Suffolk County Council Highways and District Council strategic housing demands are met in full and are written into Section 278 and Section 106 agreements, respectively. So that's the current view of the Parish Council on this application.
Thank you. Have we any questions for the Parish Council? Councillor Heading.
So, sorry, I know you said it in there, but can you just clarify, how many buses do you have a day at the moment?
We have 3 in one direction and 2 in the other direction.
Okay, thank you. But at the moment, that's how it stands.
Yeah, 1 early in the morning, 1 at lunchtime, in one direction only, and then another buses in the evening.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any other questions? Thank you, sir. Our second speaker is an objector, and that's Carol Millwood. If you'd like to come forward, please. And again, you have 3 minutes, and I will remind you as you get towards the end. Thank you.
Sorry, do I press this on, or can you hear me? Yes? Right. I'm not only speaking for myself, I'm speaking for several other residents, and many of them are elderly. This site has a major problem for development, the access. The proposed access is situated at the rear of an existing estate. It's well established, of 140 houses and bungalows mixed. Traffic would be required to travel through this residential area to reach a narrow entrance. The proposed 85 houses would be adjacent to an existing development, making a development of over 220 buildings. And Mid-Suffolk's core strategy, new developments should be appropriate in scale. I don't think this would be appropriate in scale. The report from Suffolk County Highways are just number crunching and complying with government requirements. But let's get real here. 150 to 200 extra cars will make an adverse impact. And I live there and I'm aware of the problems now. If you read Objector Paul Badshaw's correspondence, you will see he travels a lot and he knows the problems. There will be, how can we guarantee public transport? There's going to be little or no, and I'm sure the county budget will address that. The residents' travel packs, they're well-intentioned, but in reality questionable. This site is not near anything. Cars will be used, and when it's raining with a young mum with children, they're not going to look at their residents' travel pack, they're going to get the car out. The government's planning framework and Mid-Suffolk's own pledge, and recently the United Nations, have urged us to minimise car journeys to reduce CO2 emissions. This site will not help. If I was unable to use my car, I could not live there, and I live adjacent to that site. Bacton has approval for 5 other sites. All are smaller and all have their own access. So I think Bacton is contributing to the housing crisis. The village hall, you've heard the parish comments. Will this ever be built? I'm not sure. I probably don't have the time to go into the sustainability of proposals 4.1, 4.2, but I really don't think it stands up. So I'm hoping the committee will look very carefully at our objections and turn this down. Thank you.
Thank you. That's excellent timing. Do we have any questions? Councillor Mansell.
I do have a question, but I think it's for the officer rather than the speaker, and I hope I'm allowed to ask this question, that the speaker referred to other planning developments in Bacton which have got permission, and I just wonder whether the officer is able to point those out on a map, where they are and how many houses they are.
Yes, that's reasonable. We can do that. We'll point them. We can't name them, but we'll point them.
Right, so. To memory, the sites are where the school used to be. You've got is it 65 houses there that were approved? And then we've got the site opposite to that on the same row, which again is a similar number. Oh, no, actually it's less number, there's about 48. We've got the reserve matters in for that at the moment, and that's been, so it's got outline, but it's the reserve matters that's come in. So that's at that end. That's the appeal, where's that? So, and you've got 81 there as well, have you? So a majority of those are this end of the village at this moment in time. You can carry on.
So yes, you've got, we fought an appeal in July on a site at Land North Church Road in Bacton, which members had overturned a decision members had overturned a recommendation of officers. So that was for up to 81 dwellings, and that decision was allowed. So that's a relatively recent piece of development. So that's That's the site, I believe, close to the junction where the shop and the pub are, from recollection. I haven't got the application site in front of me, Chairman, so I've got the decision, but not that site location plan. So it's in that part of the village.
I think that's fine. It's a bit unfair, actually. It's a bit of an ambush on the officers. They don't know everything all the time, and I think they've done a fair representation.
I'm not disputing that the fact
I think your point was relevant.
No, I'm not disputing that they're not quite sure of the exact numbers, but that was 3. I think the resident mentioned 5. So do you know where the other 2 are? I don't need to know details. I just wanted to know where they were.
So the short answer is without Mrs Millward clarifying precisely where she's talking about, it's difficult to be certain. From our perspective, there are a number of proposals in the locality, both this side of the railway line and the other, and you'll doubtless recall there was an application site further up towards the motor garage on the road towards Finningham that's part of development that you might associate with this village. So there's quite a number of schemes that have come forward in recent years. The most obvious and most recent and relevant one, I would say, is the appeal allowed in relation to Church Road Bacton, and that's next to the Manor House. So it is at that sort of locality down to the southwest of this part of the village. Thank you, Chairman.
We will come back to that point, obviously, when we speak to the ward member, so he will have a definite knowledge of the local area. Any other questions? Thank you. I will now hear from the applicant stroke agent, which is Mr. John Jennings. So you also have 3 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. The amended application before you seeks to address the reasons for the previous Development Control Committee's resolution to defer the application. Firstly, a second access has been secured to the east of the main access and will serve both the proposed community building and the play area. This will result in a meaningful reduction in traffic movements through the main site access. Another issue is the farm access through the development has been deleted. In terms of the site for a village hall, this is the only application either approved or under consideration within Bacton which is seeking to provide such a facility. If this facility is not required by the Parish Council, it will be made available to other community groups or offered as additional public open space. The car park to serve this facility is to be constructed in full. The proposal to close the pedestrian crossing over the railway line is subject to an ongoing public inquiry. However, if this crossing closes, Network Rail will be obligated to provide alternative arrangements. The amended application is supported by a revised travel plan, transport assessment and school travel plan. The additional homes would create additional demand to support the bus services serving Bacton, and as part of the travel plan put forward. The travel plan coordinator will work with the bus operators to increase their services. It is important to note at this juncture that the Highways authorities have advised that the development should not be prevented or refused on highway grounds, as there are no unacceptable impacts on highway safety. At the request of the previous committee, we have reduced the number of dwellings from 100 to 85 dwellings, a reduction of 15%. This change, allied to the provision of separate access to the community building, has clearly demonstrated a significant reduction in traffic flows through the main access point, resulting in further improvements to residential amenity. Whilst the scale of development has been reduced, the proposal is still committed to providing many benefits, including 35% of affordable housing, including a high number of bungalows, both affordable and open market. The importance of bungalows is recognised by a recent report to your full council as being a particular form of housing within mid-Suffolk where there is a severe shortage, and this is supported by paragraph 10 of the National Planning Policy Framework. Residential amenity is reinforced by the burying of the existing overhead power lines and incorporation of bungalows, together with a 10-metre landscape buffer. The landowners will accept a condition restricting the dwellings on the northern boundary to single-storey properties only. The foul water pumping station has been relocated to the southwest corner of the site, away from dwellings. The applicants are committed to the early delivery of this site and have received strong expressions of interest from a number of local and regional house builders. This development will provide a meaningful contribution towards maintaining the council's housing land supply. As advised by your officer, the majority of local services are within convenient walking and cycling distance of the site, providing a sustainable network connection via existing designated safe footways which are lit. In view of the above, it is considered that the proposal has fully addressed the reasons for the previous deferral and is requested that the committee now approve this application in accordance with your officer's recommendations. Thank you.
5 seconds out. Very good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Have we got any questions, please, for the agent? Councillor Mansell.
Sorry, again, this might be a question for the officers. The Speaker has just talked about landscape buffers and high proportion of bungalows. And I note that the title of this application is outlined some matters reserved. But I presume that the housing mix in terms of bungalows and the landscape buffer are part of the reserve matters and not part of the outline. Can I have that confirmed, please?
2 points there that drew my attention. One was the bungalow issue. Obviously, that would be a matter of reserved matters. The housing mix, both market and affordable housing, is a condition in your recommendation. I think point 3 on the recommendation of conditions. So we would maintain control over the mix and tenure of all properties coming forward at reserved matter stage. So that is still to play for, in effect. I'm just picking up on the height restriction was mentioned on the northern boundary. We have not got that as a condition in any form. It might be something members wish to pick up in debate, and if that is the case, maybe I can come back to you, or the Chief Planning Officer can come back to you on that basis if you wish to explore that any further.
Thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Matheson.
Yeah, just to clarify that point, absolutely, that from Mr. Pateman G, that the under the recommendation B, 1B there, on page 37, so you're saying that the control of mix is of the site rather than of the affordable part?
It's for both market and affordable. That's open to the whole site.
Thank you. Any more questions? Thank you. Thank you, sir. And now we move to the ward member, which is Councillor Andrew Mellon. Andrew.
Thank you, Chair. I hope you'll indulge me. I'm going to make 5 basic points, and these are reasons why I believe this application should be turned down. And the first one of that is that I don't believe that the applicants have dealt adequately with the concerns the committee expressed with the first application. The access is still unclear, and the applicant intends to use one main entrance for the residential houses, which seems to me is not adequate when there's a possibility of having 2. On the public transport, we have a problem in Bacton in that basically we've seen over the years a diminution of the bus service. We used to get 7 or 8 buses a day. We now have 2 or 3 minibuses a day, not buses, and that service is under review. Its support from the County Council is under review. We have no timetable confirmed beyond September. So it would seem to me rather odd if we had 2 new bus stops constructed and no buses. On the railway crossing, this railway crossing has not been confirmed that it will be closed, and yet the developer is proposing a play area next to what I consider to be a dangerous crossing. I've seen people using that crossing very unwisely. There's no gates or anything that would stop people getting onto it. So it's a real concern about people using a play area next to an open crossing. And then we come to the village hall, or the potential community facility. To my mind, this is offered as a sweetener, but there's been no consultation with the community about where or whether a new village hall has required. At the last count, Bacton has something like 7 or 8 public meeting rooms that people can use in the church, in the surgery, in the scout hut, in the football club. So there's a multiplicity of public meeting rooms in the village, and we already have a village hall. Now, there has been a concern expressed about the village hall going forward, needing to be improved and possibly onto a new site with better parking. But the working assumption, and this includes informal discussions with Tony Bass, who's an officer of the council, that when the primary school closes, and we don't know when that will happen, that the building currently used by the under fives would become the new village hall. This is the sort of working assumption in the village. So in all those things which caused the committee to previously defer the application, I don't feel that they've been adequately addressed in this new application. If I can move on to my second point, and this is the fact that we already have a large number of homes approved for construction in Bacton. And I will just go through them just to confirm this discussion earlier. We have, opposite the middle school, 64 homes with outline reserve matters currently under consideration. Turkey Hall Lane, which wasn't mentioned, 51 homes with outline permission. Next to the manor, 81, up to 81, which was the subject of the recent public inquiry. Broad Roads, this is the road going towards Finningham, 47 houses approved. That application is about to lapse and they're putting a new application for 66. So we're already around the 250 houses approved in Bacton. Alongside that, we have the site of the middle school, which is still under negotiation, and the application is still sort of basically a stalled site currently. It doesn't have approval, subject to negotiations with the county council. So there's another 50 homes there. So we're talking about 300 homes already in the pipeline for Bacton. According to the joint local plan, Bacton is expected to provide a minimum of 225 homes over the next 18 years. So you can already see that Bacton is making a significant contribution to local development. And were we to add another 85, we can see why residents have concerns about local amenities being stretched. My third point is about the residential amenity of the houses next to the access. There's 5 houses facing directly onto this cul-de-sac. It's a quiet area at the back end of the estate. For those people, I can't see how we can avoid changing their residential amenity negatively. Currently they're facing onto a quiet cul-de-sac. That will become a thoroughfare into the new estate. So I have real concerns about the 5 houses there. Councillor Haddingham brought up the sustainability concerns, which are on the top of page 26 of your papers. It seems to me that the developer has failed to engage with the sustainability concerns expressed by the 2 officers there. And my last point is this. We are now in a very different situation to when this original application came in. Mid-Suffolk now has a solid 5-year land supply. And this site was not appeared in any kind of LAA assessment. It's not part of any allocation and not included in the extended settlement boundary under the emerging joint local plan. So I suggest that this application has to be considered, has to be dealt with, and should be turned down. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions, please? None. Okay, thank you. So we're now moving to debate on this subject. Who'd like to start? Councillor Mansell.
In the absence of anybody else wishing to make a start, I have my concerns about the need for this development. And I was quite shocked to read in the officer report on page 36 in the summary, I think that is, that it says car dependency will be low, because it appears to me that Bacton has a diminishing bus service. And yeah, okay, it's got a primary school and a little village shop, but I'm sorry, people who move into this development, in fact, anyone who probably moves into Bacton, will require the use of a car. So I think it's a little bit wrong to put that in print. We've heard about the other developments in Bacton, which one of them, I gather, is coming up for reserve matters. I presume none of them have got any beyond that. As the ward member says, there are 250 odd, possibly more, houses already got planning permission in Bacton, and it is going to intensify the use of the car because the bus, unless we do something about the bus service, it does seem like there's little point in spending a load of money on providing some bus stops if there are no buses to stop at the bus stops, and we have no control over the buses. That is not within our remit. So although this might seem a well thought out plan with some bungalows and a sweetener of a community space, again, there seems to have been not enough thought put in as to whether this is really necessary. So I guess the other houses that have got planning permission in Bacton, most of those probably got permission whilst we didn't have a 5-year land supply, and perhaps this one is surplus. We do now have our 5-year land supply, so does Bacton need another 85 houses? Probably not. So at the moment I'm veering towards not wanting to support this application, but I will await to see what anyone else on the committee has to say.
Thank you. Before we go any further, Mr Isbell.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, can I just pick up on that 5-year land supply point just before there's any misunderstanding flows from this? As has been mentioned, there was some discussion at appeal relatively recently, and indeed an inspector allowed planning permission on the 81 site, as mentioned. He did consider both public transport issues and a range of other things which we may all come on to during the course of debate, but certainly he did not debar further development. He acknowledged that we could demonstrate a 5-year housing land supply, but he said that does not place a ceiling on further sustainable development. He talked to a number of other things, including transport choices, and was content that planning permission be granted and there will be a range of benefits from the development. So, I'll hesitate before commenting further, but certainly as regards 5-year land supply, we may have a 5-year land supply. Inspectors can be expected to recognise that, but nonetheless consider the merits anyway. So I would be wary of considering that allows the district to draw a line in the sand, as it were. Thank you, Chairman.
Councillors, further debate. Councillor Matheson.
Yeah, I do think we needed to have had a clearer picture of the cumulative numbers and the cumulative impact that these might have. I think that's my particular concern about this, and on the point about sustainability, the officer there has, I think it's Councillor Mansell said, has been quite critical to the point of saying that the applicant has not really engaged with the got the note of that somewhere, with the MPPF and what that's got to say. And I wanted to particularly draw attention to paragraphs 148 and 150, and wonder how this particular development proposal contributes to mitigating climate change. It doesn't seem to have had any particular offer to improve its sustainability, given what we've heard that all right, well, there are some buses at the moment, but not very many, and the reality is as it is.
Councillor Masterson, your point's well made, but this is outline planning permission, so that would come actually at a later date, technically.
We obviously have put a condition in to seek sustainability measures to be considered concurrently with the reserve matters when it's submitted. This is the point of, until you actually know what the layout is and the design of the actual properties, how do you get into their merits in terms of their sustainability credentials on a range of factors. At this moment, at this juncture, and I appreciate what the MPPF says, I also have to appreciate what our development plan lacks in that context, and I have to balance the two. So this is as far as we think we can do without being unreasonable.
Haddingham.
Thank you. I too have my doubts about this this development, thinking that, you know, it seems to be a long way from the shops and the school, but I'm struggling to find any planning reason why we can turn it down, really. You know, the sustainability thing is a bit of a worry, but like John says, that's really, you know, coming up later, that we can, you know, put any conditions on that.
Chairman, if I can just pick up on the sort of the wider context of this, and you can imagine that if committee do decide to overturn the recommendation and refuse the application as is their choice, the question of reasoning will become quite important, and I would expect, were I representing the applicant, to quite heavily weigh reliance upon the appeal decision not that far away in the village. Now, the inspector in that instance was weighing other issues, including effect on a heritage asset, and chose to place considerable benefits on the housing stock that will be supplied by this, and he took a view on the amount of affordable dwellings being provided within the scheme, and effectively used the term bleak as regards affordability data for the district. So he took a clear view that there were benefits to this scheme, and public benefits which, you know, were consistent with the council's objectives in the round. You know, from our perspective as officers, there is a cumulative impact. The reference to the site to the to the west of Broad Road on the other side of the railway line, that hasn't come forward. Clearly the market has not chosen to favour that for whatever reason. Application is back in, and clearly its merits and its deliverability have to be given consideration. But, you know, my advice to committee is always decide the application in front of you and be aware of the issues that you face. You have a 5-year land supply, but nonetheless there are benefits that come from this development. We are in a situation where the amount of homes being provided here does represent a public benefit, and there are a full complement of affordables available within this scheme, which are, you know, from our perspective, of material value. In terms of transport choices, and I recognise that there is concern over that public transport question, the inspector elsewhere was quite content that this was a key service centre and that there were sustainable transport choices, and those will go up and go down, and doubtless if there are more houses, there is a higher probability, one would imagine, that that question of public transport access will become more attractive for bus service providers. You know, that is ultimately a question of how bus services are delivered elsewhere, and is not within the gift of a planning authority. So from our point of view, you know, I would urge the committee to be very careful in its weighing up. Clearly there is a choice to be exercised here, but understand that that some of these issues have been played out quite recently at public inquiry, and the district was not successful in its objection to a scheme in the village. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. I think it's an important point. We need to go on what's in front of us and what's today, really. Especially the bus service, it could go up, it could go down. We don't know. We can only read what we're reading today in terms of this actual plan application. If you are moving towards a refusal, then obviously we'd need a really good reason for that. So you might want to ponder that before anybody does propose. Further debate, please. Councillor Brewster.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, listening to all that's been said on this application this morning, we saw on page 17 and the top of page 18 the details of the previous committee resolutions and the member site visit. It does appear to me that most of those items have, where they can be, have been really dealt with what was asked by members at that stage. Access, okay, the second entrance explored for the need of the farm access, that has been dealt with. The public transport, the travel plan with current bus services, and obviously there could well be a need for bus services, and that's an unknown quantity. It is for tomorrow, I'm afraid, because the bus service is still there at this moment in time. But with bungalow developments, that would suggest to me that they could well be taken by people, and who may be infirm and may be needing a bus. So that would actually help to make a bus service more viable. The railway crossing, well, we all know how easy it is to deal with Network Rail. In actual fact, not easy at all, and they take a long time to make their decisions. The village hall, that whether the village decide they need a new village hall is a story for the parish council and the community there. But whatever, that will still be conditioned as an open space for the community, so it is a community facility. Section 106, 100 considered too many for the site, and we see that site has been reduced by 15 houses, making it a little bit more acceptable. In terms of the two possible entrances which the ward member spoke about, actually I would be very concerned about two entrances. I'm sure Bacton doesn't have them, as we may do in Stowmarket in places, but boy racers love something like that, where they can actually chase around the roads and cause all sorts of problems. I think the 5-year land supply is an important one, because it is what we have at the moment is not a truly robust land supply, and we need to continue building homes to actually increase that supply and make it actually safer, which some members are asking for. In all those terms, Mr. Chairman, I am certainly moved to the direction of approving the site. I will wait to see what else is said, but that is my opinion.
Very good. Any other points? Councillor Gold.
Thank you, Chairman. Like Councillor Hanningham, I find difficult to see planning reasons for refusal within this application. I do have a concern in relation to the railway crossing, and fear, I suppose, that itself might become an extension of the play area if we're not careful. I don't know whether any measures can be taken to reduce, mitigate that risk. I'm slightly curious in the planning history paragraph, page 19, when the Sheila assessment found it not suitable because of the site's poor relation to the functional settlement. As neither the town nor the site has moved, I wonder if you could just give some reassurance on that point also. Thank you.
Before we go on to you, Councillor Warboys, John, are you ready?
Yeah,
We'll just answer those points.
if we do this in reverse order, Chairman, and if I leap in whilst John is doing his thing. The Sheila is obviously a desk-based exercise, so it has its limitations. And I think if you were to have colleagues from policy team in this room, they would say, yes, it takes you so far and it goes only so far. Certainly, I think, my advice to committee is that doesn't necessarily allow you to draw a conclusion that it isn't a satisfactory site, because it is of its own nature a limited exercise. And I'll kind of trespass probably on John's territory as well regarding the railway crossing. I mean, clearly the public already have access to the railway crossing. There's already a sports ground not that far away. One can imagine the public, children included, may well resort to that as of right. I think these closures, as colleagues on committee will understand, I consider have been raised elsewhere and are an issue, but we have to respect the fact that they are a public right. Doubtless, as the reserve matters include layout of the site, one may well seek to relocate play spaces away from the particular location shown on this. Clearly, the village hall element and the car parking we would not expect to relocate within reserve matters, but those places where children may more naturally resort, we would hope to take away, and therefore they would probably be drawn to other parts of the village. But children will be children, I'm afraid.
Yeah, the case officer has also picked that up in their planning balance on page 36. But in respect of, if I can quickly put the site plan on the screen, can you do that a moment? I was just going, hang on, I'll change it. Go on. I was going to say that while there is an indicative LEAP equipped area, a local equipped area play here, there is no reason, even I was just to take this indicative plan, and it is an indicative plan at face value, that couldn't be relocated much further away, and there's possibly 2 other sites much further away from the crossing area that would therefore mean that you perhaps have more peace of mind about certain aged children being at one end of the district if they're heading to play on their own unsupervised compared to if they were playing near the railway line. Although that is obviously always a matter of human instinct and choice.
Councillor Warboys.
Looking at Bacton on a map, it's quite actually clear that Bacton has developed along the main road and development's taken place on lanes which come into that road. This development sort of is an extension of that kind of precedent. It's going beyond the development of the road, behind an existing large estate into open, productive agricultural land. This is actually leading to problems with access and the supporting infrastructure, because the only access to this development is going to be through the existing estate. I do appreciate the sort of value of the proposed community centre, Village Hall, but I am also concerned that there seems to be a lack of, even at this stage, there's a lack of consultation as to what form that contribution could be.
In policy terms, we've got nothing that says we have to provide a community centre in this site or within this area. It is an option that the developer has purely just stuck on the table, and we've taken the opportunity as officers to secure that for 5 years. To do much more than that would be unreasonable, because we're kind of not basing that on any policy requirements as it is. It allows time for those to come forward and decide if they wish to take that on board or not. And that is an opportunity that we're effectively maintaining for the time being if this was to be approved. Otherwise, it becomes open space. But in terms of actual need, we could be argued not to require any kind of provision at all, and therefore all we're doing is allowing the opportunity and not losing that opportunity. We're not actually securing a community hall at this stage.
Councillor Mansell.
Thank you. I would just like to voice my disagreement with the comment from Councillor Brewster about the reasons for deferral being addressed. I'm sorry, but I think I agree more with the ward member in that they haven't really been addressed. I think the only one that has been addressed is number 5, which is about the number of houses being put on the site. And yes, you can't deny that that has been reduced. But given that one of the reasons for deferral was to investigate the railway crossing, I don't think it has been investigated fully enough. And yes, we've heard from the officer that the play area doesn't have to go there, it could go somewhere else. But I certainly have got the impression that the location of the community facility is pretty much going to be in that location. And regardless of where the play area is, youths will congregate around the community space, so they are still going to be adjacent to the crossing. And certainly in other applications, or certainly an application I can name, there was a condition about the closure of the adjacent railway crossing to a development, and yet nothing of that nature seems to be here. We've also heard about Councillor Matheson comment on sustainability. Now, my issue is not with the sustainability of the buildings, but with the sustainability of the location. I'm still not convinced that it is a sustainable location. It will increase car dependence. Everyone who lives there will be dependent on a car, and in that sense, it's not sustainable. We can deal with the issues of design of the layout at reserve matters if it gets that far, but I am not yet convinced that Bacton can sustain any more development in a sustainable nature.
Thank you, Councillor. Just from my point of view, actually, on the previous committee points that have been addressed, I think they've all been addressed apart from the railway. We've already discussed the access, that it's less than 150 dwellings, you only need one access. The fact there's an emergency access in there as well as additional. The community centre might not happen, but it will remain community space. And just a reminder on the railway crossing, it's currently part of a public footpath and is used. And Network Rail haven't come back to us, so I don't see that the officers could do any more on that point. Next person is Councillor Norris.
Thank you. Like Councillor Haddingham, I am also struggling to find good planning reasons for refusing this application, although I have considerable concerns about it. Although I appreciate this is purely an outline application at this stage, but looking at the indicated layout on page 44 and comparing to the existing residential properties adjacent to it, it does seem very much of an urban style development within a rural setting and being out of character with its surroundings. I do also still have reservations about the proximity of the play area to the railway crossing until we have more assurances on that point. And as regards sustainability, I think the statement about car dependency will be low is very difficult actually to support, as we've heard about the restricted public transport facilities in the area. So I am still undecided on this one. I'll wait to see if there are any other further comments from members.
Councillor Matheson.
Yeah, I can see the difficulty in finding reasons for refusal, but I was thinking a little bit more about that little phrase from the planning policy team, that it was poorly related to the functional settlement. And going back again to the five, I think it was in the end, developments that are either approved or one in the melting pot at the moment, they are much better related to the shop and the school and so forth than certainly to the potential future school as well. And when you start to look at it, the far side of this development is actually rather a long way away from those services that people are being expected to depend on. So officers are clearly not going to help us, but the looking at that and looking at the cumulative impact, and we haven't got a good policy that helps us with that. I'm really very reluctant to actually, embark on approval at the moment.
Thank you. And we're just going to answer that point. Actually, we'll give it a little bit more weight to it in sort of detail, and then we'll come to you, Councillor Heading.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm just trying to get John to get me the aerial map up so that we can have a quick look about relative distances. There are various developments, as you know, within Bacton, which have been discussed within the five. It's important to note that it's not that one. That one, yes. Oh. So clearly, we discussed where the shop and the pub were at the southwestern end of the village. The Broad Road site is to the east of the railway line. It may well be that the infrastructure requirements in order to navigate under the well-marked low bridge under the railway line have caused people to question whether that site is actually deliverable. And as I'm well aware from our Housing Delivery Action Plan work, delivery is the key thing for ourselves to engage with. So in terms of location relative to the shops, you've got footway connection through to the west, and albeit this may be of the order of 600 metres away, I regularly pass through this area, and people can and do regularly use the footway to connect from the various parts of the village. So, from my perspective, that is entirely likely that they will do so. And Broad Road is not more convenient and would require negotiating the bridge, which was itself the subject of an infrastructure ask, which may mean that site's never actually deliverable. So in terms of connectivity, I think there is, there's quite a lot from our perspective in the balance here. Thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Hadding.
Thank you. I was just going to say, I remember I think it was for 81 houses, the one next to the listed property. I remember at the time we were looking at the cumulative effects of how many applications were in Bacton at the time, and the fact that that's been turned over by the inspector, I think, we're really going to struggle here to have something that we can really sort of stand on if we try and turn it down. And so for that reason, with a heavy heart, I'm going to, push for, recommend that we go along with the officer's recommendation for approval.
So we do have a proposer for approval. Seconder, please.
I'll second that, Mr. Chairman.
We have a proposer and a seconder for the proposal for approval. Councillor Mansell.
Should this proposal be passed, would the proposer and seconder be willing to consider the conditions suggested by the planning officer about the height restriction on the northern boundary?
John.
If you'd like me to speak to that first before you consider it. It was a passing mention, and obviously this is an indicative layout plan, so I can't say plots A, B, C should be restricted to X. It would perhaps be best to phrase it that within, and I've measured it, 20 metres of the north boundary of the site, that there shall be no development exceeding single storey. That might be the best phrase to use.
Both happy? Councillor Matheson.
If we're moving in that direction, the other particular note that I've got is on page 102 that there is mention of advanced landscaping before construction, which is something that I've asked for many times, and we can't impose it as a condition, I am told. But on the other hand, if it's being offered, can we pin it down somehow?
Yeah, John, please.
It's not, to my understanding, being offered. It's a recommendation from our place services consultant. The only problem with advanced landscaping is it has a habit of being bulldozed the moment the construction team comes on, and I would, and also landscaping at this time is a reserved matter. So there is potential for us to look at that really at the next stage rather than preempt what may come forward at this point.
Thank you. So, good debate. Thank you for your contributions, everybody. We have a proposer. We have a seconder for approval. All those in agreement?
Sorry. Have they agreed the conditions? Or I didn't
yeah,
hear whether they had agreed it or not.
Yes, they did. Yeah. Sorry, Phil.
And that's, Chairman, and that's with the amendments that John mentioned at the right at the beginning of his presentation.
Yeah, all of that. Is everybody happy? So, proposer and a seconder with the conditions. All those in favour?
1, 2, 3, 4. 4.
And those against?
4 against.
Yeah, I have a casting vote, and I need to go with my my initial vote, which was 4, so approved. Now moving on to agenda item 7B, which is the outline planning application for residential development of up to 43 dwellings, 14 affordable, in Jacks Green Lane, Creeting St Mary, Suffolk. Ready, Daniel? Can all members please confirm they've got the additional piece of paper that's delivered this morning? Thank you. And Councillor Norris now moved over as ward member. So, Daniel, if you'd like to present, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, we've got before us an application made an outline with all matters reserved for 43 residential dwellings in land off Jacks Green Road in Creeting St Mary. There's nothing further, apart from the late papers, that came to reflect the final comments of the Suffolk Floods and Water team. Oh, there's the other one. The application site is highlighted in purple on the plan. We've got, it's currently a agricultural field. There's a drainage ditch that runs across it, which is visible in the photos later. But if we look at this plan further out, the site's still in purple, but you can quite clearly see flood zone 2 and 3 crossing the site, and that follows a line of a drainage ditch within the site itself. You'll note the linear development along Jack's Green Road to the northwest, and then the estate suburban development to the south. The A14 runs up north to south along the northeastern boundary of the site. This is just the aerial photograph showing a little bit more context. You can see the surrounding area is predominantly rural in character, but then we have that strongly suburban area to the south. And then further out, I'm not sure if you can see it particularly well, but we have, it doesn't show up on here. We have Creeting St Mary, 1.1 kilometres away up here, down a footpath. And then access to Needham Market is also down a footpath, again, sort of a similar 1.1 kilometre distance away. If we move on, we have the illustrative site layout. There's an area of open space consisting of play space and also a meadow at the north of the site. That takes up the majority of the area that falls within flood zone 3, such that would still be there and functional for use. And housing as a vulnerable use is situated well outside of any flood zone. If we move on to the site photos, here is the site. It benefits from existing agricultural access from Jack's Green Road. Members will see in the distance there's a clump of veteran trees here on the edge of the site. These are mentioned in the report and are outside of the site area, such that they would remain throughout development. This is looking the other way, and this line of scrub is one side of the drainage ditch. Here's the site looking north, so the A14 is in the distance behind the trees on the edge of the site. Here is the ditch running up through the site. And then this is the area on the other side of the ditch proposed as meadow open space. And then this is a view up towards the linear run of development to the northwest of the site. And then this is the road looking that way as well. To the aerial layout. Go. All matters are reserved with this application, such that the layout is indicative only, and all matters will be back before committee if we were minded to approve for additional scrutiny. Looking at the development, we're looking at a density of around 18 dwellings per hectare on this site, with delivery of additional housing, 35% policy compliant affordable housing, and additional benefits on the site. Based on the officer's recommendation and the consultee responses we've received, the recommendation before members today is for approval, subject to the agreement of a Section 106 agreement, which would be negotiated, and the details of which are included in the report.
Thank you. Do we have any questions? Thank you. Councillor Headroom.
Thank you. Can I just, you really quickly went over it, there's a photo of the water course. Can you just show that photo again, please? That's it. That is the main...
That's the drainage ditch that runs through the site. Obviously there, it was quite a dry day, it was quite a hot day, so actually the water levels are quite low. But then, obviously, the flood zone data information is based on updated data for worst case scenarios in event of flooding events exacerbated by climate change, and show that it does have capacity to breach the ditch and extend out into the site. But that's the reason why in the indicative layout it's not very visible on the screen that I'm looking at, unfortunately. But there is a sort of red line that traverses the site, if I can do it up this way, just along this boundary here, and that is the edge of flood zone 3.
Councillor Mansell.
Thank you. I'd like to ask a question regarding the summary of the highways response on page 127 of the report, where it says that the high school is in Debenham and is 7.5 miles from the site. Is that actually correct? Because Stow Upland and Stowmarket high schools are both closer than that. So is this village really in the catchment for Debenham?
I think the issue here is the way that highways comments have been worded. They don't tend to look at catchments anymore, which would be, yeah, potentially we could look at a number of schools within that area. I think you're right. I think the closest probably is Debenham. But we can, no, sorry, Stow Upland. Let's get all the words right. But no, I think, yes, we could look at that, certainly. But that's, in looking at the comments from Suffolk's infrastructure team, they do note a need for requirement for secondary school education, transport contributions, and we can look to nail down where that would look to be delivered and how that would look to be spent within the section 106 that would accompany any approved recommendation.
Any other questions? Phil, yeah.
If I can just pick up on the education point, Chairman, I think you'll find there's advice from county infrastructure colleagues Neil McManus on page 163 regarding pupil yields and school presence, and that does make reference to Debenham and Debenham, I'll put my teeth in, and a number of other schools, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Haddingham.
Sorry, it's a bit of a dark question, really. There's a black spot on the aerial map, and I can't really see on the site layout whether that relates to a tree or, I mean, is it that a sort of a specific tree with a TPO or something on it?
There's no TPOs or other special landscape designations affecting the site. If we, hopefully that's the right way, is it this one, that spot? I think that just relates to the power line. So if we go back to the photos of the site, and in particular looking across to the drainage ditch, I assume it's relating to that.
Okay, cool, thank you.
And just to reiterate, there are no daft questions. That's a very good question. Councillor Matheson.
Thank you. Yeah, I was rather concerned at the number of consultees which were flagged up with no response. I don't know that you'd like to actually comment on that. Quite a lot of them are actually internal to this council, you know, it does kind of point towards whether, you know, whether this is the right time to be making the decision and the recommendation of the decision if we haven't heard from all those people.
I think with regards to the no responses reported in the report, that's just to give a full and clear view of what consultees we have actually gone out and sought opinions from. We have then gone and chased them to ensure that if they have pertinent comments to make, we are in receipt of them so we can make our decisions. You know, where we have the most information available to us, there's not a requirement for them necessarily to respond. And to report no response is just to give the clarity, because I think actually if we were to respond in the reports to say no comment, that's actually a very different comment to one just not being made. And I think for clarity we want to be clear that where people have not responded, we should be reporting that. But at the moment we feel that while we may have some missing consultees, we do have others who have similar remits who have picked up and have responded and given us that information to cover the topic.
Yeah, just to be clear on that, on the pre-meeting, we discussed that at length, and I'm satisfied actually the officers done everything they can to try and get responses, but you can't force somebody to respond. Councillor Mansell.
Sorry, I've come up with another question. I'm terribly sorry for coming in twice. Can I just have some clarification, please, that the access is part of the reserved matters in this application? Because I know a lot of other outlines do include access. So the access point on the plan is still up for grabs. It's on reserved matters.
Yes, the access point is part of the reserved matters, so that could move as part of any application for outline planning commission. They do need to be able to show that they can make an access to the highway, and highways are satisfied in this instance that they can do that. But that might move and change. Obviously, we've got the flood zone within the site, so it's unlikely to be moved anywhere close to that. I think we'd have a lot of issues with the Environment Agency in terms of permits, and then with floods and water in terms of culverting or bridging over. So it's probably more likely to be in the area shown, but no, it is subject to potential movement.
Any other questions? Councillor Warboys.
Yes, the parish council brought this one up, and from the photographs it was quite clear that there's some major power lines running across the site. What measures will be taken to deal with that?
I actually know this, so I'm quite pleased to say. So the policy on electrical magnetic fields is set by government. So all the pylons and all the cables and everything else have got a certain level, and that level is to ensure that there's no harm to anybody's from EMF activity. There is a set distance that you have to build away from those substations and also from cables, and obviously I'm pretty sure that will come up in reserve matters. But actually, there is no law that says you can't build near power cables because they are protected against EMF, against harm to bodies. That's the policy at the moment. Any other questions? Thank you. Then we'll move on to speakers. So we'll start with Paul Scully, please, sir. Mr. Scully is from the Parish Council, and you have 3 minutes, and I'll remind you when we get close to that time. You just press the button, it's got like a mouth on it, on the right-hand side.
The connection from the new development at Jack's Green to Needham Market, you state, can be made on foot all the way by public footpath. This is incorrect because the footpath only goes as far as Crown Street Bridge, Needham Market. Thereafter is a narrow road with a blind spot. This is the nearest route to shops and bus stops. You've also made no reference to those who are elderly, disabled, or who use wheelchairs. Jack's Green Road has a 30-mile-per-hour speed limit, but Suffolk County Council highways state that there are no unacceptable impacts on highway safety. This is incorrect, as shown by a survey conducted in 2013 on behalf of the Parish Council. Over a 7-day, 24-hour-a-day period, vehicles exceeding 30 miles per hour was 65.6% travelling southbound and 57.2% northbound. This was unacceptable then and will be exacerbated by the increase in volume of traffic when Brahini's 52 houses are built further along Florden Road. The junction with St Mary's Gardens is already a black spot. The Parish Council has recently purchased a speed-activated sign in an attempt to remind drivers to slow down. Therefore, the addition of 43 houses is totally unacceptable. You state the SIL monies will be used in part to improve the capacity of both the local primary school and the GP surgery in Needham Market. The primary school is full and cannot be expanded, and I understand neither can the surgery in its current position. The parking outside the school is already congested and dangerous at peak times. This situation is made worse on occasions when the church holds a funeral service, as it can clash with the school pick-up time. We don't tick a box for a bus stop or a public house, as both are on the A140, which is a long way from Jack's Green, and indeed unusable to most residents in Creeting St Mary. We also do not tick a box for a local shop. All of these factors must be taken into account. The Parish Council, acting on behalf of the residents, are against this proposal because this hamlet will not be improved or enhanced in any respect. On the contrary, it will convert a rural area into a suburb of Needham Market, which is totally unacceptable and outrageous.
Thank you very much. Any questions for the Parish Council? Oh, I've got one. You say it's a black spot. Do you know how many accidents there have been in the last, say, 5 years? Thank you. Councillor Matheson.
Yeah.
Sorry, I do have a question for you, sir.
Yes. Can I just ask you a little bit about the your fourth point there, current flooding issues would become a lot worse. So there's a drainage ditch across the site. So we're talking about downstream from that. Where are the issues arising?
The flood extends across the field, across Jack's Green Road, all the way through, across St Mary's Road, right through to the river. River Gipping, that is.
Are there any other questions? Thank you, sir. Now have the applicant stroke agent, which is Louise Mills, please. And once again, you have 3 minutes. Thank you.
Good morning, and thank you for agreeing to let me speak. My name is Louise Mills, and I'm the clerk for Needham Market and Barking Welfare Charities, the landowner. Firstly, I must apologise that our agent is not present. This is due to unforeseen personal circumstances. I thought it might be useful to give the committee a little background to the land being discussed. This site was gifted to the Alexander Almshouse charity over a century ago. Its specific purpose was to provide an income to support the repair cost of the charity's existing almshouses and to further support the residents within them. In the 1970s, a section of land was compulsory purchase for the A45 dual carriageway construction, now named the A14. An agricultural lease has been in operation for over 40 years with the same family, who at one point farmed the land. With the introduction and size of modern farming equipment, crop farming on the land stopped many years ago as the plot simply isn't big enough. The lease offers only what can be described as a peppercorn rent, which is swallowed up for some years if the rent is reviewed. The site itself is located immediately adjacent to housing on three sides, with the A14 being located on the other. This site, whilst located outside of the build envelope, would provide a suitable form of much-needed local houses and provide an important economic benefit to the local community. The site is both close to the A14 and A140, providing excellent commuter links, and is also located in close proximity to both Stowmarket and Needham Market and their associated rail links. There is also a footpath that links and connects the proposed development site into the neighbouring village of Needham Market. Trustees own 4 almshouses located within the grounds of Drift Court in Needham Market, which were built following the sale of the old almshouses in Needham Market that no longer met modern-day housing standards. A financial surplus from their sale exists. It is hoped that by realising the value of this land and adding to the surplus, additional almshouses can be built to further the charity's ability to help its intended beneficiary. Whilst the plan proposals submitted are only indicative, the outline plan scheme has been drawn up in accordance with current planning legislation with guidance from our local planning officer, to whom we are grateful. Every request during the planning phase has been accommodated by trustees to try and ensure that the proposed scheme would meet with the guidance of both the national and local planning requirements. The scheme proposes a mix of 43 housing units and an appropriate proportion of affording houses, which is broken down as follows: 14 affordable housing, of which 2 are two-bed semi-detached, there are 8, 3-bed semi-detached, there are 6, open market 29 in total, 4 two-bed semi, 12 3-bed semi, 7 3-bed detached and 6
I do apologise,
detached.
but if you could just summarise, please.
I'm now finishing. If this planning application were to be successful, trustees will offer the site for sale, and as already advised, any monies raised would be reinvested to support the charity's beneficiaries. Thank you for your time. I'd be happy to answer questions.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions, please? Councillor Matheson.
Yeah, I was a bit puzzled that you hadn't, the report on page 123 said there'd been no pre-application advice, but you thanked the officers for their help, so whether that needs correcting or something.
I'm not aware of any pre-application advice that's been sought with regards to this site, whether or not there's been feedback between officers and the agent during the application. That's probably what's been referred to, but it's not the case that we haven't reported pre-application advice to the committee.
We've actually been dealing with this for a number of years and have had face-to-face meetings at the Old Mid Suffolk District Council offices and numerous conversations off the record to try and format the best plan. I could also answer the question on schooling.
Oh, no, it's fine, thank you. Any other questions? Thank you for your time. We'll now hear from the ward councillors. We've got two. Who'd like to go first?
My choice. Thank you. I fully support Creeting St Mary Parish Council's objections against this application on page 124 of the papers. The site falls outside the settlement boundaries of either Creeting St Mary or Needham Market and therefore is in conflict with policy CS02, development in the countryside and countryside villages. I've not seen any evidence in the papers of any proven need for development in this particular location. No public transport serves the site. Any future residents would for all purposes be dependent on the use of private cars to access local facilities such as the doctor's surgery, which is located at the southern end of Needham Market. This conflicts with the aims of the National Planning and Policy Framework to aspire to a low carbon economy and also policies CS03, reduce contributions to climate change. Flooding issues. I know the area quite well and the site is on a slope with a drainage ditch running across it, the adjacent land falling within flood zones 2 and 3. The runoff from development on this site can only make matters worse. The East Suffolk Inland Drainage Board have commented in their consultation response on page 125, fourth paragraph, last sentence. Prior to engagement with the consenting process, no assurance can be provided by the board that the wider drainage network has sufficient capacity to accept the proposed positive discharge connection. Overdevelopment. Whilst I appreciate this as an outline planning application, the indicative estate style layout shown on page 144 incorporating a considerable proportion of 3 and 4 bedroom houses would be out of keeping with the existing residential properties in the immediate area, which are mainly of single story bungalow type configuration. This is in conflict with Policy H13, Design and Layout of Housing Development, and Policy H15, Development to reflect local characteristics. For these reasons, I cannot support this application. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Phillips.
Thank you, Chairman. On top of what my colleague has already said, the flood management report only arrived this morning and we haven't had time to really talk about this. And it was sent on the, what is it, the 15th of July? Why is it taking so long to arrive? I mean, you know, we should get these papers earlier.
Yeah, it was just, I noticed it this morning in the bundle that the incorrect response had been provided to you in the bundle, and I want to make sure that we had the correct response. I think on page 125 of the report, I know that they've removed their holding objection, but then when we go to the bundle, the holding objection is still in place. I wanted to make sure that we had the most up-to-date comments from them from the 15th of July, and to make sure that members were in full receipt of the opinions of the flood and water management team, given the flood zone on the site.
Yes, it would have been nice to get it a bit earlier. Although the field is not actually in a floodplain itself, it's between two floodplains, and as Michael stated, it is on a slope, and therefore any runoff is going to go, the actual building is downslope of the flood ditch, so therefore all the runoff is going to run straight down towards the river, and across the road and flood the areas that are already in danger of flooding. The doctor's surgery in Needham Market is struggling to cope at the moment, and although they may say otherwise, that would take up to 2 weeks to get an appointment there, unless you're very fortunate, and therefore this would put a lot more pressure on them. And it's also outside the settlement boundary, which I see is against our own ruling. Thank you.
Are there any questions for the ward members? Councillor Mansell, please.
Thank you. I have a number of questions that have come to me during the people being able to speak. I think some of them may be for the planning officer, and I'll try and go through which ones they are. I'd like to ask the ward members about the schooling of people in Creeting St Mary. Do you know, I mean, do children go to Debenham or Stowmarket or Stopland High School? Do most of the children go to Creeting St Mary Primary, or do they go to Needham Market? And is there a pedestrian path all the way to Creeting St Mary Primary School? Those are my questions that I think the ward members may be best placed to answer. And my question to the planning officer is about the proposed density of housing. Whilst I know this is an outline planning permission, we've got to fit a load of houses onto a plot of land. And I'd like to know what the density is, excluding the flood area, which isn't going to be built on. So although it may look like a nice open development, a lot of it is in flood zone. So if the planning officer is able to produce that for me, and how that compares with the existing housing density in the area. Thank you.
So we'll have the officer answer first, and then we'll come to the ward members.
Yeah, so if we look at density, the application site itself with 43 dwellings, including all of it, results in a density of 18 dwellings per hectare. If we take out the flood zone and the meadow beyond, that increases the density to 27. When we look aerially across to the development at St Margaret's Green, it appears, comparing and contrasting the illustrative layout with the layout of dwellings there, it appears that visually it looks to be a similar density, but actually when you look at the site area for the St Margaret's Green development, its density is reduced to around 12 per hectare. So there would be a jump of 6 looking at the entire site, and then a larger jump if we exclude the flood zone and meadow beyond.
Thank you. And moving to the ward members to answer the 3 questions, please.
I'm afraid I don't know the answer regarding the school, and as regards the continuous footpath, I'm quite convinced that it is not continuous in some places, so it does mean walking in the road.
Stephen, any points?
Yeah, I believe they go to Stow Upland, and that is the prescribed catchment area for that area now for the buses, although there are earlier generations that go to Stowmarket High. Other than that, it's much what Mike said.
Thank you. And Councillor Matheson.
Thank you. Yeah, on page 127, the highways look at residual cumulative impacts on the road network, and I was thinking about that, and I do live in Needham Market, so I'm a bit familiar with that. Is the main access to Needham for vehicles under the bridge in whatever the road's called, I can't think of it. Is that the way through? Because only that is effectively an alternate single direction road.
No, it isn't. Actually, the normal route would be via Hawksmill Street and round in that direction, rather than down Codden Road under the restricted railway bridge, although down Hawksmill Street there is also another railway bridge.
Just for clarity on that though, Hawksmill, if I remember properly, you go under that bridge, do you not? There's no restriction.
No, there's 2 bridges.
Yeah, but there's no restriction.
Yes, there is.
Okay. Any other questions? Sorry, Stu.
Just reply to that. There is also a restriction that there is no footpath underneath the bridge either.
Thank you. Any other questions for the ward members? Thank you. Yep, Philip.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, so there is a height restriction going under the railway bridge, and obviously you've got the smaller bridge as you arrive at Hawks Mill. And obviously, for those who are familiar with the locality, there's a footpath connection into, I can't recall whether it's Crown Street in Needham, which it comes off the corner where Aldercar Farm Junction is. So that directly provides connectivity into the centre, avoiding the necessity of navigating a couple of bridges and traffic associated with it. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. So we now move into debate. Who'd like to start? Anyone? Shall I nominate? This is rare, isn't it? Okay, Councillor Mansell.
In the absence of anybody else, I don't really want to be the first person to speak on every application. Although this doesn't seem a particularly popular development, I have less reservations than I did about the previous one about its sustainability. It is within a mile of Needham Market. It is within a mile of Creeting St Mary Primary School. And although the ward members seem to have some doubt about the footpath to Creeting St Mary Primary School, it does look as if there is one on Google Street View. I just wanted their confirmation because it looks like it's got a path that sort of goes up the bank of the road. So I think that, you know, there is, and the county highway, county infrastructure people do say that there is a safe walking route to the catchment school, which I'm assuming is Creeting St Mary. Now, there isn't a pavement under the bridge into Needham Market if people are going to get into the shops in the town. But as we've said, and also on the map, you can see there is that footpath that cuts along the valley. So there is safe pedestrian access to the amenities of Needham Market and to the primary school. Needham Market does have a range of shops, public transport, station, all the rest of it, and they are within walking distance. And I know, much as I despise the use of the motor car for everything, I know most people don't share my views, but it is theoretically feasible. I think to walk a mile to the co-op should be within the scope of most people. We just need to educate them better. And I wasn't at a previous DCB. I think there was another application in this close by, just down the road, and I've looked. I think that was for 50 odd or something. So, and that seemed to be passed by the committee. Now I realise that there may be some cumulative impact here because there's another development of a similar sort of size. But I really, I don't think we have any grounds really for refusing this application. I think it is a sustainable location in as much as it's probably one of, you know, in acceptable terms of sustainability. New residents will be able to walk, and I have seen people walking along those paths into Needham Market from Creeting. So I really, you know, I think there are so few grounds for anything but approval here. But I'd like to hear what other people have got to say.
Thank you. Anybody else? Councillor Brewster.
Thank you, Chairman. Excuse me, sorry. Yeah, I've just been looking at the consultee comments from the parish council there. There are only really 4 bullet points. One mentions the overdevelopment of Creeting St Mary, which is debatable because obviously the A14 is very, very close to this, and so hence Creeting St Mary is within the A14 and rail corridor, which has been recognised for development through the Mid-Suffolk area. The second one is sorry, this is on page 145. Oversubscribed school and struggling doctor surgery in Needham Market. And we've heard that actually there's no room for expansion on either of those. Having said that, SIL payments can do quite a lot of stuff to mitigate those problems. The power cables, you've answered that one, and the current flooding issues was the fourth one. And looking at the papers, which I know we haven't had that much time to read through, but they do look to be some conditions there which would, I believe, take care of those issues. So rather like Councillor Mansell, I don't have too much problem with this one, and feel that, you know, it is possible and probably, again, difficult to find reasonable planning reasons to refuse it.
Thank you. Councillor Haddingham.
Yes, I agree with everything Councillor Brewster and Councillor Mansell said. I think Jason Skilton has covered everything with the conditions he suggested, and I'm happy to recommend approval on this.
I will second again, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, I mean, I do share the view that there are not reasons to refuse this. I do think that there should have been more concern regarding the Hawks Mill Street vehicle bottleneck as it is already. But given we haven't got highways support on the point, I think that we'd be fools to try and use it to refuse anyway. So I shall be approving reluctantly. But if we are going that way, then I have some particular point somewhere on what conditions. What else we might say on the conditions? Can I stray on to that now?
Please do.
Yes, I think that to ask the question of the ward members, is this land actually sloping southwards? Broadly, you were saying it's sloped.
Bring in Mr. Isbell, 2 seconds.
Daniel, if you can get the plan up, I think my recollection, having driven past this site on many journeys to work, the slope of land does effectively go from the, if you can get the site plan back, Daniel, go from the eastern side roughly in a northwesterly direction on that plan. It would be hard to actually say absolutely, but you do slope down to the watercourse, and you've got an overbridge to the south side with a cluster of trees in the corner. So, you know, you've got that raised land there, but the land itself is generally sloping in that direction. And doubtless the ward member will correct my memory. But
any comments?
Sorry, for clarity, no. It slopes down from the east to the west to the watercourse. From my recollection of passing the site, and slightly from the northeast as well, so that you've got the A14 corridor. And you know, there's obviously been some ground modelling around the overbridge to the south, but that doesn't affect this land. So generally speaking, everything is running in that sort of northeasterly, sort of southwesterly direction, but obviously there's a cross gradient going from the east to the west. And at that point, I really would defer to local knowledge, because it is some time since I travelled there.
We're getting a nod from the ward members, so let's establish it's actually going away from the development to the stream, that sort of direction.
Yeah. I mean, the point I was looking for was whether we should be writing one of Mr. Isbell's famous informatives, suggesting that the developer, when they go to reserve matters, does have a look at MPPF 148, 150 about using the land appropriately for energy efficiency purposes.
Sounds reasonable.
Chairman, does sound reasonable. So that effectively you're talking about orientation, aren't you? You're making the most of the alignment of the development with what comes forward. So yes, we'll take that away as an informative, Chairman. Quite happy to do that if proposer and seconder are happy.
Thank you. Proposer, seconder? Yeah, all good. Thank you. Okay, so we have a proposer, we have a seconder for moving to approval of the recommendation with that informative notice. All those in favour?
It's unanimous, Chair.
Unanimous. Approved. We're now going to take, because we're all of an age, a 10-minute break. So if you can be back in here, please, for 11:35. Everybody, that's us back in the room. We're now going to move on to agenda item 7C, which is an award of Stonham. This is outlined planning permission with some matters reserved for the erection of 34 dwellings, associated garaging and parking, and as detailed within your sheets. Daniel.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, this is an outline application for 34 dwellings in Stonham Aspal. Different from the last item where all matters were reserved. Some matters are submitted for approval at this stage. That includes access and layout. If we go through, here we go. This is a site outlined in purple. It lies between East End Road, which runs along here, and then you've got the A1120 tourist route going along this way in front of Stonham Barns. The site's still outlined in purple. We've got a number of Grade 2 listed buildings within the area. We've got this one to the south, which is the school farmhouse. We've got this one to the west, which is the old schoolhouse, and then we've got Longlands Hall up here to the north. The brown line is the Stonham Aspal Conservation Area on the edge here. Here's the aerial of the site. You can see that we've got some sporadic development to the west and to the north around East End Road. We've got Stonham Barns complex to the south, and then if we come slightly further out, we've got the edge of the built-up area of Stonham Aspal along here at the junction of Crowcroft Road. If we come slightly further out, you get an idea of the character of Stonham Aspal itself. It's fairly linear, running along the street, the A1120, although there are a few instances of sort of small cul-de-sac development off the street as well. Here's the proposed layout. This is revision F. We've gone through a few with the applicant. They've been helpful in providing additional drawings. This provides a density of 17 dwellings per hectare. We've got a cul-de-sac arranged around a single access. If we come forward, we've got revision G as well. This follows on from comments made by the Highways Authority regarding this section of private drive to serve these dwellings. There was a fear, looking at the last application, that there would be some issues in terms of headlights dazzling drivers between the A1120 and this private access drive. So this has just been submitted to mitigate that, and we could implement some landscaping to further mitigate along the front. Here's a slightly further removed. It shows the visibility displays to the site, because obviously access would be agreed at this point and then would not be moved on submission of reserved matters. And then we've got a plan provided by the applicants, but noting that we've got a small development here, granted permission in 2016 for 10 units. We've got the edge of Stonham Aspal here, and from the site here we've got the provision of a footpath along this section of the A1120, which currently has none. There's also Section 106 funding available to Suffolk County Council as a Highway Authority to connect a footpath from the edge of this development where it joins the road, and then along the frontage of this development at Stonham Barns, which is yet to be implemented. The development site itself here would provide some form of frontage footpath as well, but there'd also be footpaths running down through the site from East End Road, so you'd be able to get from the site back into Stonham Aspal, and from Stonham Aspal to Stonham Barns, and then also from East End Road down to Stonham Barns and then into Stonham Aspal itself. So we'd be gaining a number of connectivity improvements through the development. We've also been provided with 3D mass modelling. We've got a fairly uniform two-storey development. It's noted in the report that obviously in terms of design, we'd probably be looking to see some amendment to this at reserved matters, such that we've got a little bit of variation in roof heights, and we've got something that's a little bit less uniform and maybe speaks a little bit more to a few different character areas. If we come now to site photos, this is the site. This is taken from East End Road, looking south over the site. It's an existing agricultural field. This is the boundary of the site with the low-lying hedgerow, and then we've obviously got some quite good landscape screening to Longlands Hall beyond. And this is looking the other direction. This is looking east along East End Road, and that screening continues along here. And then if we come to the top of East End Road and look back down, we have that continuing along there as well. This is an aerial view, a more recent aerial view, 2019. The images that I've just shown you are dated 2009, but we can see that from the aerial there is still a good amount of tree cover and landscaping to that boundary maintained, and also to Heatherleys as well, which is this property here. This is looking along the A1120 at the edge of the site. This is the site here, so we're at the edge and we're coming back into Stonham Aspal. There are a few trees along the boundary, but there are significant areas of open space through which the access could be taken. And then here we are at the entrance to Stonham Aspal as well. You can see the 30-mile-an-hour limit for Stonham Aspal starts at the closest edge of the site to Stonham Aspal, and I think it's proposed within the application to remove the 30-mile-an-hour speed limit so that it comes further out along the A1120. So if we come back to the layouts and the aerial views, let's go ahead. Yes, so in terms of the application, it's been set out in the report that officers recommend approval for the site, subject to confirmation from Highways that they're sufficiently satisfied by the amendments to, that's the wrong way, sorry, to this plan, to see that their late comments are sufficiently dealt with and addressed. Prior to receiving those late comments, we had reports from the Highways Authority that they were happy with the previous revision, so revision F, where they then identified those issues and have suggested conditions. So those have been carried forward, but we just want confirmation that there's nothing more that they require. We'd also require completion of a Section 106 agreement. We're being offered a policy compliant level of affordable housing on site. And there's also this linear run of open space along the top of the site as well, so we're getting some footpath connectivity along here, obviously just to make sure that we've got public access secured at all times and that the maintenance of the site is secured as well. I'll pass the item back to members to take initial questions.
Councillor Haddingham.
Thank you. You said a lot about footways, but just one of the things that the Highways asked for was that to confirm the footway within the Crowfield Road application can be used by the public. Like I said.
Yeah, so going back and speaking to the agent, he's the agent for that site as well. Yes, it will be. The intention is to provide a public footpath, not just a footpath for the users of the Crowfield Road site, but a footpath connection through to Stonham Aspal and then along to Stonham Barnes as well.
Councillor Mansell.
Thank you. I too was going to ask about that point that Councillor Haddingham's mentioned, but I'm not familiar with Stonham Aspal and I don't know where the Crowfield Road application is. So could somebody point that out to me? And the other question I was going to ask was on page 183 in the Anglian Water consultation response. It says that the local planning authority should seek the advice of the local flood authority or internal drainage board, and I wondered whether that had been done because I can't see a comment from either of those two bodies.
The site we're considering today here, then this is the Crowfield Road site, and this is Crowfield Road itself here. So in Stonham Aspal itself, there's existing footpath to the edge of the Stonham Aspal FC site, and then there's no footpath beyond this point. So anyone from Stonham Aspal wanting to access Stonham Barns walks along the edge of the A11120. There are verges, but they aren't particularly large, and they aren't particularly, they're maintained at public convenience. So they aren't necessarily. It's not necessarily a welcoming route, but it is a route that people do take. So as part of this application, within the bounds of this application, there's a footpath shown down this side here. So you would come to the corner, cross Crowfield Road, enter this site. Then there's the Section 106 contribution that Suffolk Highways would be utilising to provide an element of footpath along to the edge of the Stonham Barn site, and then this application obviously would be connecting up to that on the other side. So there'll still be a need to cross the A11120, but obviously if the 30-mile-an-hour speed limit is moved up, there is an increase in pedestrian safety in making that crossing.
Mr. Gold.
So with regards to
sorry, before we go on, Councillor Mansfield, sorry, do you want to come back on that? My apologies.
Yeah, sorry, I haven't had the response about the drainage, and is the planning officer able to say whether that that footpath within the Crowfield Road application is likely to be adopted as a public right-of-way?
I can't speak for the Highways Authority as to whether they'd want to adopt that as a public right-of-way. I think that would probably be offered as a permissive path rather than a public right-of-way. With regards to drainage, obviously consultation with the Internal Drainage Board. We haven't taken consultation from them. The site's flood zone 1. We've not noted any particular assets that they need to be consulted on. We could reconsult on that if that would satisfy members. But in terms of consultation with the IDB, that is generally a separate consultation anyway. They would need, you would normally gain planning permission. You might consult them at the same time, but normally in terms of speaking to the IDB or the Environment Agency, depending on who looks after connections into drainage ditches, that's normally a separate process. So we don't necessarily need to have their comments at this point.
Councillor Gold.
Thank you. I'd be grateful for some help in understanding the tension between the recommendation to approve and the comments of the assessment of the planning policy team. Where was it now? I had it a moment ago and I made the mistake of turning the page. 186. Yeah. Bottom of 186, top of 187, please.
In terms of the planning policy response, obviously, as officers, we've had to weigh the material weight given to the adopted local plan. So, in part, that comes from judging it against the policies of the MPPF to see where we have policies that conform with the directives of the MPPF and where we don't. Where policies don't, they're afforded a lesser weight. We also obviously need to bear in mind that we are in a position where we have an adopted development plan that is not wholly compliant with the MPPF, and we have the joint local plan that's currently emerging, but isn't sufficiently advanced enough to be given sort of a moderate degree of material weight within decisions. So in terms of weighing the application, as set out in section 3 of the report, we've gone through and made the assessments with regards to CS1, CS2 and the MPPF, and have come to a different decision than our colleagues in planning policy. But this is the application as we have it before us, and we're weighing it against the development plan and the weight we can attach to the development plan that we currently feel we're able to reasonably demonstrate.
Just so we're clear about that point about the emerging plan-led approach, which is described by policy team, the advice of Robert Hobbs has previously been that at this point in time, given the consultation ongoing with that document has very limited weight. That weight will grow, but at this point in time, it does. Notwithstanding that, you've got a suite of existing policies to weigh, and that question of conformity with the NPPF is a matter of partly your judgment, and doubtless we may get into that conversation during debate.
I believe it's Councillor Brewster, and then Councillor Haddingham.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, can we, just going back to footpaths and actually 30-mile-an-hour limits, can we just have a little clarity on that? Because I know there's 2 or 3 different developments going on there. Who is actually providing both of those? Is that possible?
And go back to
is it this developer actually providing footpaths and
so
30-mile-an-hour limits?
Yeah, so within this application, it we're providing the footpaths within its site as shown in the layout, and the 30-mile-an-hour movement would be funded by this development. In terms of the connection along here, there is Section 106 contributions for Suffolk County Council to implement a footpath along part of this run, and then this application here, and the developer of which is a separate developer, would be providing a footpath link to connect to the edge of Suffolk Highways footpath, delivered through the Section 106, through their site, and then there would be a crossing at Crowfield Road to connect up to the existing footpath network.
So it's basically almost a team effort, really. Okay, and the 30-mile-an-hour limit signs, the movement of those?
Yeah, so we've got, at the moment, the 30-mile-an-hour limits are around here. We've obviously got the access into the site around here, and then, you know, this portion of the A11120 is an unrestricted speed limit, national speed limit. In part of achieving visibility displays and allowing for a more controlled access to this site, movement of that 30-mile-an-hour speed limit to the edge of this site would be provided. So you'd have slower moving traffic coming along the frontage of the site. You'd have the access making connection with that slower moving traffic. And then if you were to have pedestrians making access to Stonham Barns or from this site across into Stonham Aspal, you would have them making any crossings on a road with a much lower speed limit than currently exists. At the moment, the 30-mile-an-hour speed limit is here, the access to Stonham Barns is further up, and from that point on in the pedestrian's journey, you're coming against traffic moving at considerable speeds.
So if I could just come back, Mr. Chairman, is there any opportunity, because there's a relatively short distance across the frontage of that site to the access point. I'm just wondering if there is any opportunity whatsoever of moving the 30-mile-an-hour limit signs while they're being moved just that much further. I know 30-mile limits are 30-mile limits, but often drivers don't slow down at that immediate point.
Potentially, and we can explore that point with highways when they come back to confirm about the changes to the layout. I don't think that's unreasonable at all. I think that in part movement of the 30-mile-an-hour speed limit is accepted by the agent and the applicant, and in highways as well. I think they're keen to see that moved as well.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, if I can just pick up on that, I mean, the process of traffic regulation is subject to a separate order-making mechanism. There would be a consultation process, so we're not completely in control of that. And arguably, I believe the custom is to have the signs where the regulation order starts, rather than to be ambitious and go further beyond that. But I understand what you're saying. We'll take that away.
Councillor Haddingham. Okay, Councillor Matheson.
Thank you. Yeah. Two questions. Paragraph 3.6, page 189. You've mentioned the settlement hierarchy. It doesn't actually say what's the position of this village in the settlement hierarchy.
From memory, I think it's a primary village, although I think it is reduced down, although I'm happy to be corrected as we flip through the relevant documents. It's not primary, it's a secondary.
We'll get an answer for you. We're just checking the policy.
Oh, sorry, that's secondary.
Right, secondary, okay. Secondary. Right. Second question, you on page 191, paragraph 6.1, you've said there is a close physical relationship with neighbouring domestic development. Stonham Barnes isn't residential apart from one manager's house. So I was wondering quite what that phrase was intended to mean, because certainly, you know, Stonham Barnes is notoriously not supposed to be residential.
No, yeah, it's definitely not a nod towards Stonham Barnes in any way, shape or form. In terms of the MPPF, it sets out a specific test at paragraph 79 to avoid isolated dwellings in the countryside. In terms of the interpretation of that policy, legal judgments have come down from neighbouring districts that say that isolation is to be interpreted as physical isolation only. So in terms of that paragraph, and apologies I don't make it clear within the report, I should have done, we have a number of domestic developments across to the north of East End Road. We've got Longlands Hall, we've got a number of sort of sporadic developments there, and then to the west as well. So in terms of domestic dwellings, that's what I'm referencing. And then obviously I think looking towards Stonham Barnes to the south, obviously there's an acknowledgement there are a number of facilities provided on Stonham Barnes in terms of post office, shops, things like that that could be made use of by... And Stonham Barnes, not including, yeah.
Councillor Mansell.
Thank you for allowing me to come back. Some of these recent questions have caused some confusion in my mind, I'm afraid. On page 193 of our papers, it talks about the Stonham Barnes planning permission, including a traffic regulation order, results in a change of location of the 30-mile-an-hour speed limit. Was the previous question referring to the newly proposed 30-mile-an-hour speed limit from the Stonham Barnes application, or the existing 30-mile-an-hour speed limit? And if so, could we have some clarity as to where those are and will be? And also on page 183, in the response from Stonham Aspal Parish Clerk, it says that the Stonham Aspal is classified as a secondary village in the current local plan. I've just looked at the draft joint local plan, and Stonham Aspal seems to have been upgraded to a core village.
Yeah, no, so in the current development plan, Stonham Aspal is a secondary village. Within the emergent joint local plan, I'll have to take your word for it. I don't have it in front of me, but yeah, if it's a core village, then that would be its new designation. In terms of the joint local plan, though, we are very early in the process of consultation, so that may be subject to change.
Yeah, so just while we're on that one, obviously we're dealing with what is today, what policies are today, so we all get clarity, but actually it's what is today. Okay, that's the bit that matters, what policies are in place right now that affect this development.
In terms of the 30-mile-an-hour limits, no, I think as part of the Section 106 from the 2015 development at Stonham Barnes, which is in part funding provision of the footway along that side of the A1120, there's also a TRO required to move the 30-mile-an-hour speed limit. So we'd be moving it along further out. Yes, if we can go.
Just while you're getting the map up, so it will become a core village. But as I just said, yeah, it's a secondary village right now. That's what we're going to discuss.
So we've got a public right-of-way or a footpath to be enacted here, and I would assume that the TRO is to move the 30-mile-an-hour speed limit up to the edge of that footpath, with then further movement out to the edge of this site at some point.
Sorry, can you clarify, where is the existing 30-mile-an-hour limit, and where will it be moving to?
So the existing 30-mile-an-hour limit is on the edge of Stonham Aspal here. As part of the TRO for the Stonham Barnes application, which is also providing part of the footway, that will move out and will join up with the edge of the footway that's to be provided. And then as part of this application, I suspect there's going to be further movement along to the edge.
Councillor Hanningham.
Thank you. I'm only going to ask you, I hope you haven't already mentioned it, but I know the ward member isn't here. How many bus services does the village have?
So in terms of access, we've got that outlined. No, we don't. In terms of access, that's outlined in section 6. Sorry, I've confused myself with my own numbering between the two reports. So there is some bus connection within Stonham Aspal. I think there are two, I think one outside the village hall and one at the corner of Crowcroft Road. In terms of bus services, we've got the 115 operating there that connects from Mendlesham to Ipswich. I don't know of the I don't know of the frequency.
Councillor Norris.
Yes, thank you. But my question has just been answered, actually, in the officer's response to Councillor Haddingham's question. Thank you.
Councillor Warboys.
Just one the Longlands House, which is at the top of the context, the Great Two listed building. It's a large house set back from East End Road. The Heritage team proposes that the layout submitter proposes to retain an unbuilt buffer area along the northern boundary, which would greatly reduce the impact of the built environment. Is that part of reserved matters?
So in terms of the reserve matters, we've got the layout to agree at this point. So if we agree the layout, that will be fixed in place. What may be subject to change is the landscaping within that buffer, because landscaping would still be a reserve matter, but that would be landscaping to the edges of the site as well and to the frontage. So we'd have some play in terms of the appearance of that buffer and what's provided within it in terms of landscaping conditions, but by securing the layout at this stage, we are securing that buffer to the listed building now.
Thank you.
Are there any final questions? Excellent. Okay, so we do have some speakers. So straight away we'll have the Parish Council, which is Mr. Ian Wright, please. And again, as before, you have 3 minutes, and I'll remind you as we get close to time. Thank you.
The Parish Council unanimously agreed to object to this planning application on the grounds of the strength of public opinion against the development locally, the scale of the development, the impact on the village as a whole, the ability of the social infrastructure and utilities to cope with additional households, safety of access to the site, impact on the setting of listed buildings, impact on the character of East End Road, and the suitability of using the site as classified as open countryside for residential development. The proposal conflicts with MSDC's current and proposed local plans and policies, which obviously have validity under NPPF, now that MSDC has a 5-year housing land supply. The site is well outside both the existing and the draft local plan settlement boundaries. The Parish Council is not alone in its objection. Your own senior policy strategy manager, who I think's opinion should be respected, strongly recommends refusal of this application, and their objections point to the proposal's speculative nature, undermining the emerging plan-led approach, it being out of keeping and proportion with the existing settlement and surrounding area, and its impact on infrastructure such as schools, health and highways. I mean, SIL payments can help, but they don't buy off objections. The County Council's Strategic Development Officer's submission also echoes those points. And we fail to understand why the planning officers so casually dismiss these opinions. Both the Joint Local Plan and MSDC's own planning policies should have some respect. The site's never been identified on Sheila as a potential residential site and therefore must be considered speculative. Alternative sites in and around the village have been identified and assessed in drawing up the Joint Local Plan, and there is another application for 46 houses located within the village that is coming before these committees shortly. Also, Mr Cameron's unfortunately been misinformed about the highways actions. Highways are reducing the speed limit to 50 miles per hour, not 30, and I've made that submission to central government. And the Stonham Barnes footpath that's mentioned is entirely speculative. I haven't got time to go into it now, but I'm happy to answer questions about it. But it couldn't be delivered without 2 compulsory purchase orders and other issues. So I'll happily answer questions about that later if you wish. I must warn you that approving this application would create a significant precedent that developers will quite sensibly and quite rightly use to justify each and every speculative greenfield development in this borough, if you approve it. So in summary, Stonham Aspal Parish Council, like your own strategic planning team and Suffolk County's strategic planning team, urge the committee to refuse the application on the grounds of conflict with MSDC's current and proposed local plan and policies, its disproportionate nature to the existing settlement, and unsuitability of the location and its lack of sustainability.
Thank you, brilliant timing. Have we any questions, please?
Would you like to know about the footpath?
Councillor Haddingham.
Do you know about the bus service?
The bus service, as I think Mr Cameron said, there's a bus stop at Dovesfield, which is fairly close to the proposed development, and one right at the other end of the village. They are limited at peak times, very limited, and they are also, both bus services are under threat from Galloway's calling them in. They're two of the named routes that they're calling in next year.
Is it just one a day at the moment?
No, it's more than one a day. I think there is one that gets you in, I apologise, I'm a bit hazy on the detail, but one gets you in something like 7:30, and the return buses are, I think one's at 4:30 and one's at 6:30, but I'm willing to be challenged on both of those points.
Just a point on that, obviously we can't suppose what's going to happen with the bus service, so we'll deal with what is today. So another question then from Councillor Brewster.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, can you just enlarge on what your comments on the footpath?
Yes, certainly. If Mr Cameron would like to bring up the plans, I can explain that. Right, the slightly closer one, if you could please, Daniel. Sorry, that's too close. Okay, back to where you were. The footpath across the frontage of Stonham Barns is obviously within the gift of Stonham Barns and is part of their section 106, as you quite rightly pointed out. What you can't see very clearly on that map, you can see a green area with some trees, or a building in it, between that and the next development along to the left. The verge alongside that property, which is a private property, is about 18 inches. So there's no way you could put a footpath down there without compulsory purchasing the garden of that house or narrowing the A1120. And in conversation with Highways, they've said that's not going to happen. There is also, you'd obviously have to cross the road. The footpath through the village is not continuous, so you'd have to cross the road to get across. To make it continuous, there is another property which is owned by a local charity, which I'm a trustee, which also is very close to the verge, and you'd have to compulsory purchase that from the charity to put it on that side of the road. And the development just to the left of where the cursor is now is only has outline plan permission. The owner is disputing the access through that development, and I think I'm right in saying it's the 4th year of its outline plan permission. So if that's ever going to develop, your guess is as good as mine. But to say that that footpath is deliverable, I think is a little bit iffy, other than the bit across the front of, the disconnected bit across the front of Stonham Barns itself.
Any other questions?
Sorry, and also the speed limit is going to be 50 miles an hour, not 30, so you're going to have to walk along the verge alongside a fairly quick road, not a 30-mile-an-hour road. Sorry.
Okay, and obviously that's to be deemed factual, so we can only go off what we've got here, but your point is made. Any other questions? Yeah, Councillor Hadding.
Thank you. Would it be feasible to walk along, I think it was called East End Road at the back of the development and then along the road there? I don't know
You
whether...
would, but there is still, the footpath still doesn't connect beyond the edge of the village. Okay. And it is in fact on the other side of the road at that point, past the football field.
Okay.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
We do have an objector, which is Peter Emberson, please. Sir, again, you have 3 minutes.
Yes. Thank you, Chair. I object to this proposal on the following grounds. The location. From the case officer's presentation, you will have seen that the site is completely isolated from the village and over 200 metres from the settlement boundary. This proposal is contrary to Mid-Suffolk's current and emerging local plans. The case officer's report and conclusions, unfortunately, cannot be viewed as an accurate representation, as elements are either misleading or factually incorrect. I'm happy to expand at a later point. Speed limit will be amended to 50 miles an hour and not 30, as explained. The proposed site is unsustainable. The site cannot be connected to the village by a footpath, as previously explained. Therefore, car dependency will be exacerbated, completely at odds with the MPPF. And to put this estate of 34 houses into context, it is individual properties that surround the proposed site. The intrusive effect of a housing estate will be huge on the countryside and the surrounding residents. Footpath access to the village. As you've just heard, in a recent meeting with Suffolk Highways that I attended, it was stated the only alternative to constructing a footpath between the proposed site and the village was to either narrow the main road or to compulsory purchase land owned by residents along the route, as the verges owned by highways were too narrow to build a safe footpath. The highways representative confirmed at that point that neither option would likely be considered. Therefore, this proposal will continue to be disconnected from the village and will be unsustainable. Move on to Mid-Suffolk Strategy Planning Department. Your own Strategy Planning Department report strongly recommends refusal of the proposal. It states the proposal in question appears very speculative, out of keeping. It's very insular as a proposal that's disproportionate to the area's character. Stonham Aspal is primarily a linear pattern of development along the A1120, not a village of housing estates. And the proposal would undermine the emerging-led plan approach, the known geography and the context of the area. And they summarise by stating the proposal does not constitute sustainable development and they strongly recommend refusal. The future impact. As a local resident, I know with certainty, and I can support it, that should this application succeed, landowners in the immediate vicinity of this site will apply for residential planning permission, citing this application as precedent. So if granted, this will create an opportunity for dozens, if not hundreds, of residential units built in open countryside, affecting the areas and impacting massively across Mid-Suffolk. So in summary, I would urge the committee to support Mid-Suffolk's current and emerging local plans and refuse this application. Thank you.
Thank you. You must have been practicing. That's good. Any questions, please? None? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
We'll now hear from the agent, Mr. Craig Beach, please.
This proposal is for 34 new low-energy dwellings on a parcel of land opposite Stonham Barns, enclosed on 3 sides by highways and existing residential development. The site is well contained. Though an outline application, it is envisaged that 14 of these dwellings will be much needed 2- and 3-bedroom homes, with 16 homes proposed as 4-bedroom dwellings. The design features a community park and large landscaped open space to the northern boundary, incorporating a rainwater pond. Houses are orientated to face the street or overlook public open space with car parking and garages hidden to the rear, ensuring an attractive street scene. The officer's report notes its potential to create good townscape and the layout as being acceptable. A wide planted green buffer of native species hedges and trees will be bound to the eastern edge to open fields, with extensive tree planting and hedge planting proposed across the site. At present, there are no trees or hedgerows, and the extensive landscaping will significantly enhance the development. Opposite the site is Stonham Barns Leisure and Shopping Village, with post office, shops, recreational facilities, restaurant, and 34 other registered businesses. A pavement is included, which will connect the development to Stonham Village, with its school and further facilities and Stonham Barns opposite. The site is on a bus route with a regular 2-hourly service, and it's proposed to extend the 30-mile-per-hour limit to cover the site entrance. The application provides much needed affordable housing in full compliance and support of the Council's policy. The applicant, a lifelong village resident, feels a responsibility to provide an appropriate and attractive development that offers wider community benefits wherever possible. As stated by your planning officer, this is a sustainable location with good pedestrian connectivity and no adverse impact on the natural environment or biodiversity. We urge you to follow your planning officer's recommendation for approval. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you have any questions for the agent? Thank you, sir. The ward member's not here, which is Councillor Susie Morley, but if you could read out the email that we had from her that represents her thoughts and views on this proposal.
Thank you, Chair. So I'll read this out on behalf of Councillor Morley. Stonham Aspal has in the region of 240 homes. This development, together with others already approved but not yet built, would increase the village by about 23%. Why has this application come to committee when so many consultee responses are missing? The footpath that was supposed to have been delivered as part of the Stonham Barns application reference 3150/15, is not deliverable, as the proposed route is over private land and is supposed to join up with the footpath subject to the Crowfield Road application of 4847/16. This is also on private land and cannot be accessed by the general public, so is also not deliverable. If this application is approved, it will mean that children will have to access the main A1120 where lorries are travelling at speeds of 60 miles an hour to get to the other side of the main road, walk down the A1120 and then cross back over to access the school. This planning application originally came up for pre-app advice at a time when Mid-Suffolk did not have a 5-year land supply. Now that we do have a provable 5-year land supply, we do not need to approve applications that our planning policy team are recommending for refusal. With regards to MSDC planning policy, I don't want to repeat everything that you have already heard in the report, but would ask that you consider the details as set out at the bottom of page 186 and the top of 187. This application flies in the face of our emerging plan-led approach and totally undermines everything that our MSDC planning policy team are trying to do with our joint local plan and putting our communities at the heart of determining what is best for their village. Also, on page 190, it is stated that occupiers of the development will use local services and facilities in Stonham Aspal and at Stonham Barns. There are no formal facilities within Stonham Aspal other than the school and the mail order Mexican shop. Stonham Barns is a private site and has an enforcement notice outstanding for non-compliance. The owner of Stonham Barns has already banned several people from the village, which is perfectly within his rights, but you cannot, on the one hand, argue that it is a private site and at the same time state that it has public services. The village does not support this application. I do not support this application, and our MSDC policy planning team do not support this application. I ask that the committee does not support this application. Councillor Susie Morley.
Thank you, Robert. Just a point on the enforcement of Stonham Barns, as it's been just read out, that has got nothing to do with this application, therefore please dismiss that and let's look at this for its merits and for what's written in front of us. Councillor Mansell.
Sorry, I have another question before we get to debate. And it relates to the officer saying at the beginning of his presentation that this was an outline planning permission with layout as per the plans. So can I just have some clarity that I noticed on the plan there is like rear court parking, and it was actually the applicant's comments made me look at it again, and I noticed that the design out crime officer, whatever the terminology is, have made no comment, and yet we do have comments about rear court parking that isn't overlooked in other applications. So I just wondered what the planning officer had to say about his views on rear court parking.
Yeah, so the layout is to be agreed at this stage, so we would be securing the rear court parking. I think that obviously we don't have the response of the design out crime officer before us today, and I think partly that stems from the similar comments that we raised on the last item about not being able to force our consultees to respond where they haven't, despite however many times we might chase them. In terms of rear court parking, I think that it can be an effective solution to ensuring that you don't end up with a street scene dominated by cars. And I think that often in terms of designing a scheme, you're often trying to balance differing objectives, while the designing out crime officer for the police will want to avoid streets connecting up to other streets to provide through routes. We don't have that, but then at the same time we do have some rear parking courts, but then they are quite an efficient way of providing an amount of parking, provided you've got some natural surveillance over those, and there's nothing to say that we wouldn't. We do have front gardens and rear gardens facing and overlooking them. Then you can eliminate an element of undesirable behaviour that might take place inside those locations.
Councillor Haddingham. Okay, thank you. If there are no questions, I know the ward member's not here, we will move swiftly into debate. Councillor Haddingham.
Thank you. I'm torn with this development because I don't frankly really like it. I think it's a long way out of the village. I think to say that there's some surrounding development all around it is stretching the point, as there's, you know, a few houses around it. I think the A120 is a horrible road. It's basically at the moment, you know, it's the road from the A12 to the A140, and it's very busy. I think, you know, at the moment it's like, can they change it from 50 to 30? Will they move it? Footpaths are very sort of shaky if they're going to be able to connect up to the village. Like I say, it's a hell of a long walk along, you know, I wouldn't want to cross that road twice holding a child's hand, frankly, to walk to school. And yeah, so they're my thoughts, people.
Councillor Mansell.
Thank you. I too have a lot of concerns about this application. With our current local plan, which is valid, Stonham Aspal is a secondary village. This application is not adjacent to the existing settlement boundary. And yes, our planning officers say, oh yeah, it's surrounded on 3 sides by existing development. But as Councillor Haddingham said, those are large properties with large gardens. They are not a modern housing estate. And some of them are old buildings, and there's some listed buildings sort of peppering that surrounding development. That I also do not consider this to be a sustainable location, because we've heard about the issues with the provision of the footpath that was promised on another application, which I think this application is really relying on to make it a possible walking route into the village and the rest of the amenities. There seem to be some issues with the speed limit. And I have my doubts about the design, which we are being asked to agree at this stage. We've heard our planning officer's comments on the rear parking courts, and I know I may not actually agree with the design out crime responses in a lot of cases, but the reason I don't like rear parking courts is nobody uses them. They will park in the highway because they don't want to walk all the way around from their rear parking court to their door, and unfortunately that is human nature. So I think we have several reasons that we could latch on to a refusal on this case. I'm not going to prepare it yet, but I just think it is outside policy. It's not adjacent to the settlement boundary. It's in the countryside. It's not sustainable, and I don't think much of the design. I'm happy to wait to hear what other people have got to say, but I think there's lots of reasons there.
Thank you. I'll just come on to on the rural setting of things, and there's a question really whether this is actually isolated or not, and because in some people's minds it might seem it is, in other minds it could be attached.
Thanks, Chairman. Yes, as Daniel did say earlier, this has been one that Braintree District Council had the luxury of taking through the courts, and it's fair to say you have to be very, very remote to be isolated. My advice to committee here today is that this isn't isolated, but you could certainly make an argument that it's detached from the main village. But I think you will be on uncertain ground if you try to argue its isolation. I think in literal terms there's a requirement, there's an expectation in paragraph 79 of the NPPF that refers to isolation. I think what you mean is perhaps something slightly less than that terminology of isolation, because that would be the wilds of somewhere rather than somewhere which is at this sort of remove to a parent settlement. So I'd urge a bit of caution around that word, Chairman, but I think I understand the principles we're talking about.
Thank you. Hopefully that will help you in your sort of debate and discussion. Councillor Brewster.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, I do have concerns, I have to say. I don't feel certain that we can actually make a fair decision today. In terms of the footpath structure, the speed limit structure, and also another thing that's come to my mind, that in actual fact, if we're expecting people to cross from this estate into Stonham Barns over the A1120, there is no way that they can cross safely. There is no crossing proposed or anything like that. Personally, I don't have too much problem with the actual estate itself. but I think there are safety issues which need addressing. And I'm just wondering if we could defer this to just see what can be achieved. And I propose that if I have a second.
Bill.
Well, Chairman, it's certainly possible for you to defer it. There are a suite of issues there that you've described which you could defer to seek further information from County Highways colleagues if you so chose.
Councillor Matheson.
Thank you. Yeah, well, unlike the previous two applications where I found it, reading the papers, I found it quite difficult to see where I might want to be going with that. I suddenly realised exactly where I wanted to go with this one. And that is that we should judge what is in front of us, and what in front of us is no footways and no speed limit, and no guarantee that those things will appear. They might never be developed. So I'm quite clear on that point that we should be judging it on that basis. As far as the planning policies reservations, well, objections are concerned, I'm be corrected by officers if you like, but it seemed to me that a lot of what they are saying, specifically out of keeping, and also large bulk and massive new housing, this is on page 186, members, that those are not matters that are particularly with a CS1, a CS2, and the rest of the discussions and reasons that officers gave earlier when Mr. Gould was questioning the point. They are saying some other things apart from the oh well, is it sustainable and so forth. So that point also, and as members, I'm pleased that other members are going in the same direction really. The 9.1, the surrounding residential development. Well, no. We've established that Stonham Barns is not residential development, and we've also established that the ones up the what's it, East End Road, was it? That's a handful of properties. It's not residential development, which carries a different sort of connotation, really. And finally, again, I'm not comfortable making decisions having not heard from our landscape or ecology consultees or the Suffolk Wildlife Trust. So I'm going to propose refusal.
Before we go any further with seconders for both proposals, actually, we will just hear from Mr. Isbell.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes. I mean, clearly, if that's the route you go down, Chairman, you will need to set out your reasoning and identify the policies and the harms that will be caused. From my perspective, I think you obviously have to look at the layout that is before you in judging what you consider to be acceptable. You obviously have some comments from the policy team which guide you around some of the issues as they see them. But clearly, this question of design and the layout before you is one that you are entitled to have regard to the NPPF on, and that obviously looks to ensure that good design is laid in place that improves the character and quality of an area and the way it functions, and that's indeed a key aspect of sustainable development. I mean, I can talk further about this, Chairman, but clearly that's an issue you've got to engage with as members in coming up with anything that is a proposed reason for refusal. I can talk to you about safe and suitable access should you so need, and whilst we're discussing this as a point of principle, you will need to, and I would recommend, we will ask you to engage with the question of the impact on listed buildings, because clearly that is part of the rationale here, and you have advice from the Heritage Officer. So that's kind of over to committee from there, Chairman.
Well, Councillor Brewster initially proposed for deferment, followed by Councillor Matheson proposing refusal. Therefore, I need to find a seconder for either of those. Councillor Mansell.
I'm happy to second Councillor Matheson's proposal for refusal, and I'm happy to help come up with a list of reasons for refusal.
That's good. Okay. So we do have a proposal and a seconder for refusal.
Do we need information on the legal side of
we're just going to have a look at some papers and then we'll carry on. From my point of view, to be honest with you, for what it's worth, I just find the location of the actual development is not in keeping with the normal settlement pattern. And even though it's not isolated, it is outside of the main village. A village with very little going on in it for the people that are going to live there. And also I've got concerns over the footpaths and the legal side of that as well. I don't think it'll ever come forward, but that's speculative. Yeah. Ian.
The Councillor Matheson, you're going to give us at least a broad indication of the reasons for refusal. Yeah. And yeah, well, I think if we certainly need that before we move to a vote. So, I mean, I wonder if the chairman, do you think we take a few minutes in which we all we can sit here, do you think, or is it better that we do it publicly?
I think whatever we do should be public, and you know we're not hiding anything here. So let's have that debate. Please come up with some reasons why, firm reasons, policy-driven, as to why we're going to refuse this before we go to the vote. Councillor Matheson.
Well, the usual phrasing, I think, pedestrian safety. We went to town in Fressingfield on pedestrian safety, admittedly with the support of highways. But, you know, bearing in mind what I've said about the fact that we must look at what's there, not what might turn up in due course, pedestrian safety, and then secondly, the out-of-keeping design. I'm sure officers can find where that comes up in policy. I'm not quite sure on policy terms that what the policy said about the mass, bulk and mass. I wasn't so clear about where that is exactly in policy, but they're the policy team. And I hear what officers are saying about heritage, but I've not really looked at that one terribly closely, so I'll wait for others to know.
Phil, over to you initially.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, Councillor Matheson asked about bulk and mass. I think we've seen core strategy policy CS5 engaged around that, and effectively the question of maintaining and enhancing the environment and retaining local distinctiveness. That in turn is picked up by your core strategy policy FC1, which talks about an FC 1.1, which effectively talk about proposals which should conserve or enhance local character of different parts of the district. So, you know, the question I guess I would put to members is whether or not they consider the development does conserve and enhance local character. Bulk and mass you may reference within that, and they will be the things that might drive you to that question of local character. They're all facets of design ultimately, and that takes you on to the NPPF. So those issues are there. Regarding pedestrian safety, ultimately I'd probably make reference to the National Planning Policy Framework in its expectation that safe and suitable access for all people can be provided. And I think what I'm hearing is that the question of safe and suitable pedestrian access is something that you're not at present convinced can be delivered. And in turn, safe and suitable access is a facet of good design. So that's, I'll start on that, Chairman.
I think it's very helpful. Councillor Mansell.
Now, I was going to perhaps include that it does not relate well to the existing pattern of development, which we are told is a sort of phrase that has been used in other applications. I don't know if that is a part of an actual policy in the NPPF, but it doesn't relate well to the existing pattern of development, whether that can be used in the argument as well. And although we've heard that it's not isolated, in terms of our existing local plan, this site is deemed as in the countryside, and surely that too can be a reason for refusal. It's not isolated, but it is in the countryside, and it is an unsustainable location because of the no safe and safe access for all, or whatever it was that's just been said.
I believe CS2 covers a lot of that, does it not?
It does indeed,
Yeah, so we're looking at core strategy 2. So there's a lot in there which will cover this. Councillor Matheson, I think we're getting there, aren't we?
Yeah, we are. Two things really. Can officers just confirm then that the CS5 and FC1 are not inconsistent with the NPPF, and secondly, again I ask for help in terms of the heritage response, which I'll go and have a look for. Oh, I've got it here, this, right.
Phil.
Right, so the question of CS5 and FC1, I think Councillor Matson asked about, and their consistency with the NPPF. Well, in the best tradition of consistency, I believe the Bacton inspector said no, CS5 is not consistent with the NPPF. Most recently, though, and if we go with the most up-to-date decision, the Coombs Ford decision, which Councillor Brewster will, I'm sure, have etched in his memory, and the inspectors say, well, I'm going to disagree with my colleagues, and he found it to be consistent with the NPPF. So, you know, if we go with the most recent public inquiry, that would suggest to me that there is at least an arguable case that CS5 is consistent with the NPPF. FC1, I'm fairly comfortable, is consistent with the NPPF. You would have to say, I think, that with CS1 and CS2, because they are a little more absolute in their demands, they need careful weighing, but as Councillor Mansell says, we are dealing with a countryside location, and I think the phrase she used about does not relate well to the existing built-up area. Again, this is a facet of design, and ultimately I did draw your attention to the NPPF around good design and its expectation, and I think you're, you know, at liberty as a committee to draw your own conclusions about that. I think I'm still interested in whether you have any views on the heritage side of things, but I'm kind of crystallising in my mind where members are going.
I think on the heritage side, if it might help, although there's low harm to actually those properties, this is a tourist area, so actually it does affect tourism. It affects the chalets across at Stonham Barns that look over that view, so there is an effect, definitely. So I think on the tourism side, I think that's covered in CS2 as well, isn't it?
Probably.
Yeah, so that might be a factor. Hopefully we're getting there, we've got enough to come up with some reasons, and then we can go for a vote. Councillor Mansell.
I'm just reading the summary of the Heritage Team's response on page 186, and they do consider that there is harm, and it's low harm, but presumably we can still say that we think that there is some harm and it is not outweighed by any benefits elsewhere in the scheme or whatever else.
Chairman, you are entitled to agree or disagree with your heritage officer and to weigh and say that they are either right or not as right as you are. You are the committee that makes that decision.
I'm looking at the detail on page 234, and it is very much less than substantial harm, and that it's mitigated fairly well, and I think it would be very easy to say that there is sufficient public benefit if we were, you know, going to want to approve it. So I'm not especially.
Okay. Have we got enough? So you're not going to include the heritage harm, is that correct? Even against tourism?
I mean, the issue is that I find the whole terminology of harm baffling. You know, less than substantial harm. In some respect, in some applications, that's enough to say, yeah, well, we can ignore it. But we are here to decide whether the benefits of this application outweigh that harm. And because this development we deem to be unsustainable, I'm not convinced that the benefits do outweigh the less than substantial harm. But if you think that will weaken our case, because sometimes we're told to not have too many reasons for refusal, and other times we're told to have lots. So I would bow to the wisdom of the Chief Planning Officer.
Phil.
Thank you for placing such an onerous responsibility in giving you advice here. My advice to you is that you should have defensible reasons in every case, and throwing the book at it, if it's a scheme you don't like, doesn't gain you points in front of an inspector. What matters are cogent, logical, defendable reasons every single time. Now, when it comes to heritage, that engages a very particular test in the NPPF. It engages the statutory duty to safeguard heritage buildings, in summary. I think that is one that is very specific territory, which, in terms of a defensible reason, adds considerable gravitas to the case that you make. I think that, as we've seen in Bacton, because we argued it there, it's an arguable point, but you as a committee are perfectly on safe territory to engage with the weight that you give to the public benefit balanced against the harm, and you have to have enough public benefits to outweigh the harm if you're going to go and approve the application. We say to you as officers, and we know what that is met. You are at liberty to disagree, but if you do not agree that the public benefits outweigh that harm, then you should refuse. It's that simple.
And with that simple explanation, are we close to getting a proposal?
I think that the tricky thing that we've never seen this one before, that I think what Councillor Mansell is saying, well, if we look at this in the aggregate, then we don't think there is a public benefit because we think we want to refuse it for these two other reasons, or is the balance against the heritage harm just, well, we get some affordable houses, and that's just another question for officers, I'm afraid. But if that is the advice from the Chief Planning Officer, that it adds gravitas, well, yes, okay, then let's increase it.
If I may come in, Chairman, I think my planner colleagues will agree that when it's a massive, as has already been said, you have advice, it's your role as a committee to decide on the level of harm. Less than substantial harm, we've been reminded before in this committee, is a very large spectrum. And in fact, it's what lawyers and planners call a term of art. As a term, it doesn't always correspond to what an average person would, in conversation, would say. If you can do quite a bit of what an average person would say is harm, and it's still less than substantial. You've really got to badly harm a heritage asset before it's substantial harm. I'm hoping to see nods from my colleagues here. I've got that right, haven't I? So I think that I just thought it was worth reminding the meeting of that, and that it's the committee's job is to decide, form its own judgment, noting advice about what the level of harm is. It may be less than substantial, but then there's still the duty to weigh whether it's outweighed by benefits.
Before I go to Councillor Mansell, Councillor Matheson, obviously you're the seconder on this. Proposer. So Councillor Mansell, can you please come up with a reason for refusal, if that's the way you're going, so we can then summarise it and get on with the vote?
Yeah, I mean, the two that I'm saying is that the bulk, the Malcolm mass and design, local character CS5 FC1, and the danger to pedestrians and vulnerable road users, I think they're called, are they?
Councillor Mansell, do you agree?
Yeah, I'm happy to go along with that. I also think that there is a little bit of, whatever the word is, woolliness about the heritage comments response. Now I've read the papers, they actually don't think the layout is part of the outline. And they do say it is only low. So I think we better go along with Councillor Matheson's suggestion that we just go for those two.
Yeah, thank you. So we'll summarise, Philip, please.
So thank you, Chairman. I'm trying to pull the threads of this together. As I try and read this into a draft reason for refusal, I understand that the proposed development does not relate well to the existing built-up area of Stonham Aspal, and by reason of its bulk and mass would represent poor design. It's considered that the proposed scheme would, by reason of that poor design, constitute an unsustainable form of development contrary to the provisions of the core strategy policies CS1, CS2, CS5 and FC1 of the core strategy focused review, and be contrary to paragraphs 124 and 130 of the National Planning Policy Framework. Those are the design paragraphs, and in turn paragraph 11 of the NPPF, and on that basis it's considered that the adverse impacts of granting planning permission, the adverse impacts of the development would significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits of granting planning permission. Now, as regards the access point, I would suggest a reason which runs along the lines that the information presently to hand does not indicate that safe and suitable pedestrian access for all persons can be achieved and delivered before the scheme is occupied, contrary to paragraph 108 of the National Planning Policy Framework, and that the proposal therefore fails to demonstrate good design, having regard to paragraphs 124, 130, as mentioned above. Thank you, Chairman.
Proposer and seconder, that's quite comprehensive actually, covers all bases. Are you content with the summary? Thank you. This is agenda item 7D and DC 1900108, and this is full planning application for erection of a factory and adjoining two-storey production office and other details as before you. Planning officer, please. Alex.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, members, as explained, this is application reference DC 1900108 at Camstar Herbs at Chestnuts Farm, Langton Green, Eye. The proposals are in association with the established herb production and supply business dating back to 1925. The business currently employs 33 full-time employees. The application proposes the erection of a herb product production factory and a warehouse extension and canopy, a two-storey production office and a maintenance shed, extension to the existing yard area, a new site access from the main highway, as well as the sitting of 9 mobile accommodation units to be used by seasonal workers. And the proposal will result in the creation of 39 full-time employees, giving a total of 72. I can't really see that. That's a bit annoying. Okay, yeah. This is a, you can just about see in red there where the site is in relation to Eye and the surrounding area. And this is an aerial map of the site and a zoomed in aerial map of the site showing the existing facility, the area in question. And these are the principal constraints. And now the brown hatched area represents potentially contaminated land in relation to the former Eye airfield and existing industrial activities going on there. The site affects the setting of a Grade 2 listed building at Chestnuts Farm, which is over here. It's Grade 2 listed. That dates back from the 1600s, as set out by your heritage officers in the report. The site also lies within an area of archaeological importance or potential at the edge of Broome Common, and there's the strong likelihood of medieval assets being encountered as per the comments received from the County Archaeological Unit. This is the existing site plan and the proposed site plan. So we have the proposed additional factory here with production office at the end and existing warehouses here, and the proposed extension is off in this direction. And we have a smaller scale maintenance shed over here, and the yard area extends this way to the proposed new access and the mobile home units for seasonal workers in this location. These are the existing elevations and the proposed elevations. So a similar height to the proposal, although a significant increase in floor area, it has to be said. This is elevations of the proposed office building, two-storey, but in the context of the larger buildings, it rather pales into less significance, I would say. The proposed floor plans of the office building, the proposed floor plans of the loading dock and factory, the proposed floor plans of the warehouse extension, which is really just shelves for the storing of the product, the packaged herbs, and some details of the proposed access and visibility displays. And this shows some more detail with regards to the access plan for lorries around the site. Now this is the foul drainage, means of foul drainage as proposed. Now, as you'll see in the report, there is a holding objection from the Environment Agency in this regard. They feel it's better that the site is connected to the existing foul public sewer system, which is adjacent to the site within the fronting highway. And this technical matter needs to be resolved, although it's the recommendation of your officers that it's appropriate to do this by way of condition, and there's a condition appropriately suggested at the end of the report. This plan just provides some more information on the existing buildings and where the proposed extensions would be. Onto some photographs. This is the general location of the new access in the existing location of a field access onto the existing highway, and the existing access to the existing facility, which is further to the south towards Eye. And looking across the existing field and up the adjacent highway from the proposed point of access, and there again, and this is looking across towards the site, proposed access in that location, and then turning towards the existing warehouse building, and for a point of reference, the factory will extend in this location. And this is further to the north, looking across that adjacent field. So we have the existing attenuation pond screened by trees in this location, and the factory extension will extend out towards us from this photograph, but no further to the north than the attenuation pond, and the proposed warehouse extension would be set behind this existing group of trees. And this is the existing niche in the existing building where the proposed warehouse extension would extend off. That concludes the presentation, and as per the report, officer recommendation for approval. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. Any questions for the planning officer? Councillor Mansell.
Thank you. I'd just like to ask if there are any environmental energy use sustainability features of this proposed extension, which doesn't seem to have been mentioned in the report. I know that there are regulations, but I just wonder what the proposals are. I guess they meet the regulations, but do they go beyond?
As per the extent, very little information provided with the application, apart from solar panels to the southern elevation of that large warehouse extension, as you'll see on the... can we get that up?
Can I just come back on that? Because I think, I'm not au fait with all the facts and figures in the regulations, but there is a requirement for a certain percentage of energy to be provided by sustainable means, is that right? And is that is presumably along with this application?
Sorry, do you mean in terms of building regulations and...
I don't know what regulations there are, but when we talk about industrial sites before, we're told that there is a target for the percentage of energy to be generated by sustainable means. I think Councillor Matheson's jumping up.
Okay. You can...
Yeah, Councillor Matheson, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, my question was, have you omitted to include in the conditions that are proposed the recommendation on page 239, where the consultee has pointed out that there should be a 10% on-site renewables provision, but it's not clear whether what's on the drawings is sufficient. But it's actually there, but it's not in the conditions yet. But it will be in a minute, I think.
Thank you.
Sorry, what page was that again? 239. Thank you. Yeah, noted. So, yeah, we might think about it for a condition as we move on.
Debate.
Yeah, we'll wait for debate. My apologies. Any other questions? Councillor Brewster.
Thank you, Chairman. While we're on conditions, and I may have missed this, but if I do, if I have, I apologise. The colours of the sheds to be agreed.
Yeah, so that's a good point. So we did a pre-briefing on this, obviously, and the matter of the colour of the buildings was discussed. As you know, with modern buildings now in the countryside, especially when they've got height, there's a camouflage scheme where you go blue to light blue. The current ones are green. There's enough backdrop there to support that, I think. But let's get some more clarification on the backdrop and whether the green would be suitable, I think.
Page 283.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Brilliant. We'll move straight on to the ward member then. Peter.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm going to defy today's convention of ward councillors speaking against applications, and I'd say you will have seen that our town council had no objections to this proposal, which is perfectly true, but that doesn't reflect the positive view that is taken in terms of this development. The applicant makes a significant, important contribution towards the local economy, and that's a contribution that can be extended, valuably extended, through this application being agreed. I think the positives within it also in terms of the expansion of this site will reduce the need for the applicant's intersite vehicle movements, and that has to be a positive. I have to say, from a road safety aspect as well, moving the entrance to the factory northwards will improve road safety. The present entrance is quite close to a bend, and vehicles turning right out of that, well, it's a slightly perilous activity. Obviously, the point about the colour of the units is well made, and one hopes that will be the case. But certainly, what is presented is will have a far more coherent and acceptable appearance, even though it is greatly increased in scale than the present, I call them a motley arrangement of buildings. So fully in support of this application from the ward.
Thank you. Councillor Mansell.
Thank you. You mentioned the applicant's other site, and you think that this will reduce traffic movements because they'll all be based on one site. Can you just tell me where that other site is?
Right. There's a site in Broome, but there's also a site across the road on the airfield itself. I mean, obviously, the increase in the size of the factory potentially increases the volume of business that is done, and that may arise in an increased number of vehicles. But actually, in terms of the present scale of business, inter-site movements will be reduced. And that obviously goes to be true of that even given the expansion, the number of internal movements, as it were, would still be fewer than would otherwise be the case. And the other thing, which is a particular mercy in this application, is so many applications in and around Eye, particularly commercial ones, are resulting in greatly increased traffic and HGV movements in the southern part of the town and the town centre. So this is to the north of the town, so won't be adding to that pressure.
Any other questions? Excellent. We're going to move into debate. So who'd like to start? Councillor Warboy.
I am familiar with the area, and I think this would be a positive development. There is one issue which comes to do with sort of the development, though, which is one of the concerns which was raised, which is to do with light pollution. This has been raised on several developments in the area, and I wonder if that could be put in with reserve matters, that as part of the planning, that light pollution and a lighting scheme could be developed that would mitigate this.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I in the best finest traditions of things, I was going to suggest, if you see page 239, Councillor Mathen did query a question about energy, but actually we also need to add a condition relating to noise and to light, because that's recommended by Environmental Health on page 281. You'll see, and I think it's a fair summary. If you can leave that one with officers to take away, I think it's well understood that light spill in the area of Eye Airfield is a matter of interest, and dark skies are a matter of interest. So there's a noise condition suggested there by the Senior Environmental Protection Officer, and we'd want to take away the idea of a lighting scheme to be agreed as a suggested condition, in addition to those you've got in your papers, Chairman.
Thank you.
Councillor Matheson.
Well, with various additional conditions, I'd like to move approval. Clearly, this is a business that's right in the heart of our economy, the agricultural economy, and so I think with the conditions we're adding are the 10% plus renewable energy, the lighting, the noise, and also the other one that's actually missing that we usually have there is a scheme of resource and water efficiency, because this is a full application, isn't it? That's the other one. So with those additions, I move approval.
Councillor Brewster.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I should have probably done this sooner, but earlier in the meeting, just looking at this, I've had no part in this application whatsoever, and wasn't even aware of it until I saw the papers come through. I'm just wondering, from a cabinet point of view, whether I should, for transparency, declare a non-pecuniary interest.
Yes, there's still time to, and I'm sure it's non-pecuniary, yes.
Councillor Bruce, in the past we have had discussions about your role in the cabinet. It's restricted to if you've made a specific decision regarding it as in your cabinet function, just knowing about the business or being involved through it that way. It's with regards to funds specifically that would preclude you from taking part in the debate and vote.
So can you confirm that you've made no...
I have made, no, I didn't even know this company existed, to be honest.
Then you'll continue to vote and debate. So we have a proposer. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Mansell.
Thank you. I would just like to say that I think this is quite refreshing to have a business in the heart of our district who is wanting to expand. And I would like to wish them all the best come what may at the end of October. And I hope they can still get a load of seasonal staff, but that's not for us to decide. So I think it's great that we've got a thriving company that is wanting to develop and stay in mid-Suffolk. And I think we should be supporting them in their expansion. And I agree that we need a few extra conditions. So I'm happy to second the motion proposed by Councillor Matheson with those extra conditions, if that's possible, to put them on.
Yeah, thank you. And go to further. And absolutely, the MPPF supporting a prosperous rural economy. What can be better? And it's appropriate place as well. So great. Phil, if you'd like to summarise, please.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Yes, so we're adding a condition to secure a scheme of energy efficiency measures to be agreed, which shall achieve at least 10% energy efficiency. That goes in line with CS3 as talked. Sorry, yes. Well, if you are ahead of me, Councillor, I apologise. I'm not quite with you yet. So the second one was the noise condition, which is as per page 281, and as regards the light recommendation, we'd expect to draft a condition to agree a scheme of external lighting for agreement in line with what's talked about on page 281. And the fourth condition would be effectively to agree a scheme of resource and water efficiency, which I believe is what Councillor Matheson referred to.
Yeah, that's a very good point. We almost missed it. I think that should be a condition as well to be considered. Because you may find that green's absolutely fine. So did the proposer and the seconder agree with the conditions as stated? Okay, so proposer, seconder for approval. All those in favour? So agenda point 8, site inspections.
None requested, Chair.
Thank you. And moving on to the date and time of next meeting. The next meeting will be on Wednesday, 2nd of October 2019 at 9:30 a.m. And thank you for your contribution. Thank you for your work. It's appreciated. And that's the meeting closed.